I'm surprised I got this one. That's Ken. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, we're a full house. I'll be back in one.
Hi. How are you? Well, we could get started on time.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we've got 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get going here. Looks like we got a full house. Yeah, we'll kill the mood music. Well, thank you everyone for coming out today. We've got a full house here. This is fantastic. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Shepard. I'm the Broadband Program Manager with the Governor's Office of Information Technology, and I'm also the single point of contact for the FirstNet initiative. And what I'm going to do is just kind of talk real quickly about the FirstNet initiative, what we're doing, and then turn it over to the folks that are actually going to kind of give you guys some information and help enlighten you.
Can you confirm Terry on the phone can hear you?
Terry, can you hear us? Oh.
Yeah, I hear you guys.
Okay, good.
So maybe we'll get away from this noise.
All right, so it's okay, Terry. You can hear our voices, okay?
Yeah, I hear you, Brian.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So before we get going, I'll introduce the rest of the team here. So we've got Kim Coleman-Madsen is our Public Safety Broadband Program Manager at OIT. Ed Mills is our FirstNet Education and Outreach Manager. We've got John Davey, who's our FirstNet Project Coordinator. And Travis Tiller is also with OIT, and he's helping us test out some streaming technology to start utilizing some of these meetings so we can stream them out across the state. And then I'll let Randy and Emil introduce themselves when we get to them. But you know, we had a similar meeting yesterday, and one of the feedback we got was that I kind of cruised through the background introductory of why we're here. And so real quick, I want to talk a little bit about the FirstNet initiative. I know some of you folks are very familiar with it, but some are not. What the FirstNet initiative really is an effort to build a public safety grade broadband data network. Most of us are familiar, obviously, with our communication and voice networks that we've been using for years, but we're also familiar with the fact that data is becoming really, really critical. And I think it's folks out here in Western Slope and on the Eastern Plains are even more acutely aware of that because you guys can't utilize data like we can on the Front Range because you don't have coverage, you don't have capacity. It's not reliable, and so a lot of times you choose not to use it because you basically say, if I can't rely on it, I'm not going to use it. So that's really what we're here to try to solve, is to figure out how can we build a network that will satisfy your needs so that everyone across the state can have the same reliability and the same quality of coverage that we've become accustomed to with mobile radio, and maybe even surpass it. So that's really what we're trying to do, is build a proprietary network that we can rely on as public safety. Now, you hear the name FirstNet. FirstNet really refers to the First Responder Network Authority. It's really it's an independent entity in the federal government, and their job is to kind of oversee this. And what they've done is they've said, okay, we need to work with all the states to do this. And so they've identified a single point of contact in every state, and they basically said, okay, you go out in your state how to organize this and how to do this, and you interface with us. And so that's my job and the team's job, is to basically be that central interface point between FirstNet at the federal level and the entire state. And so that's what we've been doing. So for the past year and a half, we've been traveling out throughout the state, really focusing on education and outreach and saying, okay, this is what it is. This is what public safety LTE is. This is what it can do. This is what the program is. Here's the background. And we've kind of got past that for the most part. And what we're doing now is really focusing on, okay, what the heck do we do and how do we build this? What are the requirements? Some of the time frames that we'll get into here in a minute. You know, we're starting to really get into getting the requirements, and there's going to be an RFP out. FirstNet basically is going to put out an RFP for the entire nation. Hopefully, they say at the end of this year. Most of us involved have doubts whether they can make it or whether it'll be first part of next year. But essentially what they're going to do is they're going to throw out an RFP and say, who wants to build this nationwide network? Now, as part of that RFP, what they've come to us and said is, they said, you guys need to tell us what are some of the requirements of this network that we put in the RFP. How many users do you have in a state? How much data do you currently use? How much data could you use? What kind of coverage do you want? What kind of capacity do you want? What do you want coverage to look like in Mile High Stadium? What do you want coverage to look like out in your national parks and your wilderness areas? Who uses it? Do you have search and rescue? Do you have where are your fire areas? Where are your high risk areas? Where are your ski resorts? Where do you have your festivals that you need those kind of those demands? So all of that is we have to collect that, and then we're going to give that to FirstNet, and they're going to put that in this RFP as part of the requirements. So basically, they're going to build a set of requirements and say this is what Colorado expects out of the network. Through this process, FirstNet is going to select a finalist and basically a vendor or a group of vendors to say, okay, this is how the network's going to look. They're then going to come to us and say, okay, guys, here's what this network looks like for Colorado under this plan. We then, as a state, have a choice. We can say, hey, this looks great. Thank you for listening. This is fantastic. Go for it. Or we can say, you know what, guys, you didn't really take into account what we asked you to. We need something different. And so we can build this on our own. Now, obviously, that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. But what we're doing now has to be done for either one of those. We have to figure out what a network looks like. No one, the reason that you guys don't have really great coverage out here is because it doesn't make business sense. Companies like AT&T and Verizon, they're in it to make money. So they come out here and they say, you know what, you don't have a lot of population out here. You got a huge area. We'll cover downtown Rifle, but that's about it, because that's where the people are. That's where the money is. Well, we have different needs. We know that you guys go, all around the county. That you go rescue hunters in the wintertime and they get stuck. You rescue hikers. You got festivals out in campgrounds and so forth that you need to get to. So that's where our approach is different, because we're saying not this is where people are. We're saying this is where we need to have coverage, and this is the kind of coverage we have. Now, we'll be honest, coverage is going to look a lot different in downtown Denver than it is out here even. So there's probably going to be more capacity in downtown Denver. It's just a natural progression. But what we want to get out here is coverage, because you guys can't even do some of the basic things we can do in the Front Range. So what we want to focus on getting you is coverage, maximizing coverage, but also say, where do you need capacity? If you've got a county fairgrounds and you say, hey, we've got 10, 15 events here every year where we have 5,000, 6,000 people come in, okay, then we know we need capacity in that area as well as coverage. So that's really what we're doing. And what we've done to help us do that is we went through back in October and we threw out an RFP and we said, you know what, Tim and Ed and John and I are not wireless engineers. We're not experts in the technology. We need some people to help us with the technology, understand how this technology works and how it's implemented. And so we put out an RFP for basically just general consulting help on the technology, helping us figure out how do we collect this data, how do we analyze this data, help us develop the coverage maps, coverage modeling. And we had probably about 10 to 12 folks apply. We went through a really rigorous process. We had folks from across the state on the board to review this. And we zeroed in on Signals Analytics. And Randy and Emil can introduce themselves here in a minute. But Signals, they both have a tremendous amount of experience in the wireless industry and really provide that technical and that expertise that we don't have as our staff. And in addition, Emil was head of the labs of the Public Safety Communications Research and really was involved in this FirstNet initiative from the beginning. I've been working with him back when I was in AdCom since 2009, when Adams County first got into this and built the pilot project. We were working on this. So we have a great depth of experience about this. And Randy is known for his economic modeling, which that's one of the things we really were excited about their proposal, is that they're going to help us figure out, what does this network look like? How much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost to operate? What does maintenance look like on this thing? Because as we all know, that's, we've had some hiccups doing statewide radio networks in this state and actually thinking forward and saying how we're going to actually pay for them in the future. So we want to make sure that we circle back and don't make those same mistakes. So what we're here today to do is to really talk to you guys about some of this initial analysis that we've done, give you guys a rundown on some of the key aspects of this technology, how it's different than land mobile radio, how it's similar, what are the technical parameters, and then get into what we've done is we basically gave Signals about 7,000 potential sites throughout the state. These are existing radio towers, schools, libraries, police stations, fire stations, government buildings, and we said, okay, what would this look like? Let's just do some hypotheticals just to start with. And so we're going to kind of run through some initial analysis of what they've done with that coverage to say, what could coverage look like if we wanted to cover this entire state, knowing we can't cover everywhere, but how much of the state could we cover? So that's what we're really here to talk about and start getting your feedback. What we're gonna do is continue these road shows and really ask for your feedback on this now that once we refine it. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Kim to kind of walk through some of what we've done here in the last few months and kind of give an overview before we turn over to Randy and Nina. So.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to serve you lunch, so please stay at least. That'll be around 11:30 to 12 o'clock. Bathrooms are just around the corner there. I think many of you passed it when you came. Grab that. What's that? Stand over here. All right. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of what we've been doing. Some of it may not be familiar to some of you, so really just want to, as Brian said, quickly paint the state of what FirstNet intends to do, or public safety broadband. Today we have non-mission critical data and voice capability through commercial services. And we have mission critical voice through our LMR systems. So FirstNet does intend to provide mission critical data and non-mission critical voice on cellular systems. We expect these technologies to converge in the long term. We don't know what the long term means, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And we expect them to converge because we will see shortly the advent of public safety standards on these mission critical data systems. And what I mean by that is you are going to see push to talk. Right now it's an over-the-top application. It will become native to the network. You're also going to see the ability to transmit information eventually, like emergency button information. You'll have simplex capabilities, or what's called ProSay or proximity services in public safety broadband, which will allow you to operate off of the network and still communicate with users in the area. This is not inherent to the current commercial carrier networks, but it's information that's or applications and capabilities that are going to be added to the network going forward. Does anyone have any questions really about what FirstNet's intent is? Okay. So what have we been doing lately? Well, we've, as Brian said, we've actually been out throughout the entire state. We've been to all but 2 of our counties. We've visited both of our tribes. We've also interacted with about 2,700 stakeholders at about 175 engagements since March of 2014. What we are progressing on next is really trying to collect the data and get your input on the coverage objectives that FirstNet is going to need to inform the RFP that Brian mentioned. The first thing I want to do is put a plug in for, in the upper right, your upper right, our data collection form. It's accessible on our firstnetcolorado.org website. And we need every agency in the state that we can get a hold of to participate in this data collection form. It'll take you about 10 to 15 minutes. Some of you may already have completed it, and hopefully you can speak to how easy it was. And we want to know the number of users, the number of devices your agencies use. We want to know the applications. We want to know a little bit about the commercial carriers that you use, not necessarily who they are, but the relationships you have, the contracting mechanism you have. I think there's a chair over here. Thanks for joining us. And we want to know what your adoptions to, or your barriers to adoption are. And what I mean by that is, why maybe aren't you using data? Are you not using data because it's too expensive for your agency, because there's not coverage or capacity in your area? So we'd like to get all of that information by early September if possible. If you can't complete it till later, we're always taking information in. As people who tend to be points of contacts or representative of the county or counties that you live in today, we would ask that you take that information back and go back to your agencies, and after today, perhaps you understand the criticality of participating in that process. Ed, do you have anything to add on that?
That was good.
All right. We are going to be doing coverage objectives, which is really kind of a discussion that's going to be ongoing today, or the beginning of that discussion. This is a map that FirstNet gave us. I don't know if you can see, but largely there's red in the high population areas, then there's blue, and then there's light and dark green, mostly on our roadways. They're county and state roadways. FirstNet says that this is based on a number of data elements that they collected, and it's really representative of the data points, which is why we see that gradation in color. But when we look at this map, and we'll provide it to you in a format that you can see more closely, you can see that much of the state isn't covered. And from our perspective on what FirstNet did as an initial pass, and they did this throughout the country, we believe that this is not going to be adequate for Colorado. So that's why we've begun these discussions with you, is because we want to understand from all of you, from your perspectives for your agencies and your counties, what it needs to look like in your jurisdictions. So to do that, we're going to ask you for various pieces of information. I've sent out a data call to every PSAP in this state, and we've asked for you to provide your CAD incident information. What does that mean? It means date, time, location by civic address or latitude, longitude, call type, and call classification by police, fire, EMS, or some other type. And what we're doing is we're going to use that CAD data to validate where we think broadband coverage would be occurring based on the work that Randy and Emil are doing. So what you're seeing on this map with CAD data provided by Mesa County is actually the dark blue points are the CAD calls, the light blue is the broadband coverage, and then there's some pluses on these screens that represent the proposed sites. These sites are taken from existing land mobile radio sites, and they're also taken from community anchor institutions, which were done through the State Broadband Initiative. Those represent largely government facilities, schools, hospitals, libraries, municipal and county buildings, fire stations, that sort of thing. So we are, that is meant to be a best guess. We don't actually know in the design if those sites could be used, and that information would be gathered later on. So that piece of information is going to inform the input we give back on this map. Does that make sense to everybody? And then the last piece on the lower right for you is really the fruit of the efforts that Randy and Emil have embarked upon. And they are taking all of those assets and they are actually modeling coverage based on a number of parameters that Randy will go over that we think actually better reflect what Colorado needs than what FirstNet was able to reflect. And again, FirstNet took 5 data elements. We're actually going to take dozens of data elements. We're going to look at recreation areas. We're going to look at critical infrastructure, in addition to population, highways, where responders are at, that sort of thing. We're going to look at social media data.
We have some good examples of that in there.
Yeah. So a whole list of them in case if you're interested, let us know. We can kind of bore you to death with that information. But in the end, what we want to do is we want to come back to all of you and we want to have discussions with you. And we want to say, you know what, in this area of your county, up here in Pitkin County, what Randy and Emil have come up with, we know is significantly better than what FirstNet has come up with, but we still believe it's lacking in coverage. And we're going to want you to call out those areas where coverage would still be required. And then we're going to ask you a second question. We're going to ask you, if that coverage is required, is it something you could live with in phase 2 or 3 of the implementation? And if it isn't, that input will be given back to FirstNet. And the other thing we're going to ask you is, if we're able to get to it in phase 2 or 3, could it look like deployable? For example, if you're going to do a rescue at Maroon Bells in Pitkin County, can we have somebody take a deployable in, something on their back? Is that acceptable? Or do you need a fixed site or a satellite capability? Those kinds of discussions. Okay, so kind of to just hit quickly on these bullet points that FirstNet provided and what I just went over in that previous slide is, we ask you to participate in our state survey process and to provide additional data usage information as you have it. We've asked you for your CAD data. This information, as you saw, is largely going to be aggregated on a map. There's no narrative information or RP information that's requested. And then it's going to inform that process. We are going to ask you to review baseline and help us identify gaps in your area. And then we're going to ask you to provide input on our phased approach that we want to give back to FirstNet. There we go.
I have a question on the coverage maps.
Yes.
Signal is putting out. Are they well? Do the counties have input into that map? And is that map only good for full out phases or phase 1?
Okay. So the answer to the first is yes, absolutely. You know, people have input, and in fact, what we're showing today is just a very quick preview of the process. And so, yeah, the whole intent of you know, what we're launching today is to try to, you know, engage people in getting input, and we will talk about phasing of it as well.
So this is to just give you an idea quickly. We've had about 80 responses to date. We've identified about 1,400 public safety agencies across the state, and we're really looking for statistically relevant samples. So we're hoping to get 400 to 500 response realistically, knowing you all have day jobs. But this is how it looks in your region, just as information for you, and we'll provide these slides to you after. So again, as regional or county points of contact, we would just ask for you to go back to your agencies and help them understand the importance of completing that. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. We're also doing a series of webinars if somebody's not comfortable with stepping through a Google form. And worst case scenario, they could print it out, hand fill it out, and provide it back to us, and we could input it into our tool that way as well. There we go. This is also to give you representation across the disciplines of the responses we've gotten. Fire service and law enforcement largely, and then some others. And then this is to, I like that. And this is to give you an idea of the CAD responses we've gotten for the CAD data. If your agency needs a CORA request, we've had a few agencies say we'll provide it under the auspices of an MOU or a CORA request. We're happy to do that as well. So FirstNet, their means of engaging with the public safety community, governments, as well as the vendor community is through official Federal Register public notices. And they've had a couple of public notices that have occurred in the past few months that Colorado's provided input to. This is to give you an idea of what these were about. This one is the top one. The second notice was on state plans and radio access network. And through that process, the state must determine whether, as Brian mentioned, the state can provide the network, the best network, or FirstNet can. FirstNet outlined their position related to the opt-out mechanism, and our response was focused on the need for a clear and established opt-out process, as well as affirming our rights to make the best decision possible for ourselves. So really what we've elaborated to FirstNet on your behalf is that we believe Colorado needs to be given the most flexibility possible to make a decision about planning, not only for their opt-out or for the opt-out network, but that process should they begin to step out on it. Do you want to add anything on that, Brian? Okay. FirstNet has not come back and said yet whether they're going to deviate from how they interpret the law. If you're interested in reading more information about that, you can go to our website and read our response. The point of this really is just to let you understand that we know Colorado is a local control state, and that's the perspective that we've given FirstNet. And then the last one that's also of interest to you would be FirstNet has to define a public safety entity. Public safety entity is going to be any user authorized on the network for primary use of the network. Colorado is given a broad definition of public safety entity, and that's based on saying at the local level, the lowest local level, we believe that FirstNet should allow those entities to define who should be users on the agency or on the network, defined by those agencies. And what I mean by that is if you have a local utility that's a partner with you as you respond on a fire emergency or something else, you want that user to be on a network because then you can be interoperable with them from a data perspective. And that is what this definition is what FirstNet is trying to confirm, and that's what we've told them, is we want local governments to determine who those users should be at the local level dynamically based on policies that are set. FirstNet has not come out with their final interpretation of public safety entity, but based on some processes they've gone through, we believe that they will look broadly at that definition. We also believe the more users that can be on the network and the network can be managed and prioritized, that will drive down the cost of the network for everybody. Any questions on these two? Okay. And then Brian touched basically, so I won't belabor the point, on whether the FirstNet state plan is adequate for us. And then we can also plan for our own radio access network. We're going to be doing those parallel planning process. Today is the beginning of that. We're using money from our SLGP grant, which is the grant that funds FirstNet activities. And then we're using state allocated funds through Public Safety and Public Utilities Commission that are actually allowing us to begin the alternative radio access network planning. We want to be able to present to all of you through the governing body and as stakeholders and to the governor's office eventually 2 options so the best decision can be made on behalf of Colorado. Okay, so kind of just hit on these real quick. I'm just about done. FirstNet.gov is where you can see the federal progress, or the progress from the federal perspective. FirstNet Colorado is our state website where you can see everything I talked about before. The presentations today will be on there as well. Some of you, many of you are already on our newsletter. Those of you who aren't will be added to the newsletter today based on the sign-in sheet. And you can always opt out if you decide you're not interested. We are on Twitter at FirstNetCO. And then our contact information And then we always have to say that FirstNet, or not FirstNet, but the NTIA paid for us to be here today, but they don't necessarily agree with or endorse anything we tell you today. So, anything else?
Real quick, just before I turn it over to Randy and Emil, I didn't really go through our governing body. You mentioned our FirstNet governing body. One of the things the statute told us was that we had to figure out in our state kind of a governing body to oversee this. And so what we did is we reached out to all of the public safety disciplines and said, how should we manage this? Should this be under an existing, structure? Should we put something new together? And pretty universally, everyone said, no, we need to have a focus group. And so if you look at our governing body, it's now 15 people, and it really represents the people that are going to use this. So we reached out to the sheriff's, the Sheriff's Association and said, who should represent you? We reached out to the police chiefs and said, who should represent you? We reached out to CCI at the county level, CML at the municipal level, said who should represent you. We also have focused folks on rural. So Paula Creasy from Grand Junction is our rural representative. We just added Carl Stevens from here in Garfield County as our 911 representative. So we have a really disparate group of folks. Chad Day, the sheriff of Yuma County, is representing the sheriffs. Joe Rivero from Manitou Springs. We have Chief Eric Tade from Denver Fire Department is our chair. So we really have a broad representation from urban and rural, fire, police. We have organized labor on there. So the group that oversees Kim and Ed and John and I, and that really guides our activities, really represents you guys. And so we want to make sure that everyone knows that everything we do goes through this governing body. Anything we submit to FirstNet gets reviewed by them. They review all of our action plans. Several of them said I know on the process to hire signals. So they are very engaged in making sure that what we do is representative of what you guys need. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah. So again, hopefully you will see through this. And if you ever feel that this is not the approach, although we're all technically, the 4 of us, state employees, Colorado is really taking a localized approach to public safety broadband planning. And if you feel from your perspective that is not the approach we're taking, please let us know. We really do want you all to know that we know the network is going to be used by the people on the ground in the counties and the agencies. And it's really critical that you have input on this process. So thank you.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Randy Leaning from Signals Analytics, and let me say just a little bit about kind of our agenda for today, and then I'll introduce the team, and then we'll sort of jump into it. We have basically a series of presentations, and we did yesterday. We had a what we call a deep dive interview where we in Grand Junction, where we asked a lot of questions about usage and just the needs of different categories of first responders, and that was kind of a very productive session. Today, a lot of what our objective is to really convey information, so to talk about the program overall, and to step through a lot of the concepts of what a wireless broadband infrastructure looks like and what it'll do for you, and give you a preview of some of our results. We've actually done, even though this is the kickoff meeting, we've done a certain amount of analytics which we thought would be very beneficial to just do in advance of this meeting, to give people a picture of where things would be, just the frameworks in which we're operating. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about some of the public policy dimensions. As Brian and Kim mentioned, we just submitted comments to FirstNet, and there's a whole process of feedback, from the states, to the federal government, and decisions that are made along the way. So we'll sort of step through that. And just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, hopefully you guys can all see the screen, and if not, this probably gives a good vantage point. And we have bathrooms over here, and so feel free to get up and kind of use them if you need to. We also have coffee and cold water. and so what we'll be doing is we'll start going through a lot of the material, and then we'll break probably somewhere in the 11:30 to 12 time frame, and we've got lunch for everyone, and then we'll continue until 2 o'clock. So let me just give a little bit of introduction, to the team. So Brian, Emo, has started a lot of the stuff in in the in NIST and other organizations, under related to FirstNet that are tied into public safety technology. We have another person, Mark Schultz, who's not here, who's doing a lot of our GIS work and doing and also very involved in the economic modeling, and he's someone who has done kind of radio system modeling for quite a number of years. We also have InfoVista, which is a company that does a lot of tools for radio system modeling, and you'll be seeing a lot of their work. And part of the reason that we chose them is they're also being used by FirstNet, and so kind of our vision is, as we figure out, exactly what is needed, for Colorado and create it in a lot of forums, we're going to have a set of results that are actually, parallel in terms of the tools that we're using, and kind of our belief is that as we go through, the state consultation process, where we basically have a dialogue with FirstNet and say, here's what we'd like, we'll be able to support that technically with something that's very robust and also, speaking the same language. So in terms of the presentations, we're going to start with this piece here, where we're going to talk about just the timelines of the program and deliverables. We're then going to spend just a couple minutes on what I call viewpoints, and this is really an example of the kind of feedback that we may give to FirstNet, and it's not necessarily the answer that we're going to give, because we don't know what that is, because we will determine that as a result of all of the discussions that we're having over the next month. But it basically gives an example of the format, and I think it's that'll be hopefully helpful for you to understand what we're trying to put together. We then have a segment on just concepts. How do you think about this new network, and what does it mean? And then the preview of results is very visual and it's technical, and it shows lots of coverage maps, and it should be a very interesting piece. And then finally, the public policy component. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is a bit of an eye chart, but the next slide that you see, we're going to zoom in and just look at pieces individually. So this is basically the takeaway from this is that there are three main segments to the program. There's what we call preview activities, and those are essentially done. So this is some preliminary analysis that we did to really create some very interesting material to talk about. It also included some public policy discussion. We'll come back to that in a sec. There's what we call the data collection effort, which is the second segment. And then there's a broad range of future, and that's all going to be done by the end of September. And then there's a third segment that we call future activities. There we go. Okay, so basically what we've done to date is we've, as Kim and Brian have alluded, we've got about 7,000 sites that were have been identified in a data collection process up till now. So we've done a coverage design and a capacity design to basically say how good a coverage could you get kind of using those assets. And this is actually the first of a number of different studies we're going to do. We've done a lot of planning of deliverables, and then we've gone through a process where we've reviewed what's called the draft RFP. So this is a massive document of probably 1,000 pages or so, but in a lot of different parts that FirstNet has put out and in draft form, and it's eventually what they're going to give to the vendor community and at the end of this year, beginning of next year, people will start to bid on it. Okay, and so let's see. Okay, and so the data collection process, this is actually a very important part, and this is really what we're trying to embark upon in the next month and a half. So basically, we're having kickoff meetings. So we're having one today, and then we're going to have kind of an Eastern meeting as well tomorrow. We're doing a number of what we call deep dive interviews. So we had one in Grand Junction yesterday, and we'll have another one on Thursday. And these are basically opportunities to step through a lot of the dimensionality of what we're going to need to areas we're going to need to provide feedback and begin the dialogue of really asking what are the most important use cases. We're also doing what we call, we're looking at a demand forecast. So this looks at quantifying the number of first responders as well as the usage levels that we expect. We'll be eventually provide a coverage specification, and this is something where we're very, very eager to get as much input from public safety entities and from each county as possible, and we'll talk a little bit about that process. We also need to provide a viewpoint on the prioritization of build out. So in other words, if we have the choice of what do you build on day one versus in phase 2, phase 3, we will be providing FirstNet with a viewpoint on that, and it may or may not be what they had in mind, but that's the nature of the dialogue between the states and federal. And I think almost certainly the desire is to influence things to be much more proactive in covering more remote areas sooner. We'll produce what's called difference maps, which show the difference between what we believe should be covered and what was part of their initial proposal. And then this will all get boiled up into a set of feedback to FirstNet that'll feed into a formal process. Okay, and then future activities. We'll be doing actually 8 different coverage modeling analyses, and this is so we're actually looking at this analytically from a lot of different directions. And the idea is you could use existing state assets, or you could use commercial sites. You could go for a model that covers 100% of the geographic area of the state, and these all have cost implications and so, but basically our view is that we need to look at all of these and then ultimately decide what's most appropriate. In conjunction with that, we'll be doing a number of economic analyses, and we'll be looking at things like public-private partnerships, and then we'll also be doing a lot of training. And Emel's going to be doing sort of a roadshow over the next 18 months, basically, where we'll be doing a number of different types of training in different locations throughout the state, and on a couple different topics, and there'll also be many of them kind of web enabled, and so you'll hear more about that in the near future. Okay. Oh, okay, good. I'll just do this. Okay, so this is just a quick snapshot of the some of the coverage scenarios, some of the different scenarios we're going to look at. So right now we've done some preliminary work on coverage only, if we just want coverage and had no other objective, and then on coverage and capacity. And as you can see, there are a bunch of other scenarios that we'll be doing going forward. And and some of them use they use different types of sites. Like we have, for instance, the community anchor institutions, which are schools and libraries and often buildings, and one of the advantages is they're often in areas that have no cellular coverage today. So putting up a tower there would be an opportunity. But they're also, we'll have the ability to use commercial sites as well. So we'll be looking from all of these different dimensions. Okay, oops. Okay, there we go. So this is just a quick picture of some of the assets. So each dot represents a potential site, and what's very interesting about this is the geographic coverage that results from this, which we'll talk about in detail later, is significantly greater than what you have with commercial coverage today. And so I'm going to step through very quickly just some of the information that that FirstNet has asked states to provide, and this is really just to give you a little bit of insight into the process that we're going through. So this is tiny print here, but basically the categories are coverage, users in their operational areas, capacity planning, current service and procurement. In other words, if you're spending money to buy mobile broadband service from one of the major commercial carriers, who are you using, and so forth, and then a little bit on the state decision process. So let's see now. So there are a couple. What's interesting here is there are a few areas. A lot of this is very factual information. There are a few areas that are much more qualitative and really need to be paraded through a very deliberate and interactive process where we speak to each of the stakeholders and for instance, in the area of coverage objectives, really figure out what are those areas that should be covered that may not be obvious from anything that you could see in terms of demographics or satellite or morphology or other things. So that's a process that we're going to be very focused on. Also related to that is the phased deployment approach. What should you do first and second, and why? And then data usage. We've got, fortunately here, a lot of benchmarks of what consumers use, and so so there's a sort of a question of what will a first responder usage profile, how will that be similar to or different from an average consumer profile in terms of volumes of usage primarily, and then how will that grow over time. So that's some of the feedback that we'll be providing. So the next few slides I'm just going to show you basically what's been put forth as a in terms of the FirstNet materials, and then we'll come back to each of these materials during the rest of our session. So one is coverage objectives. So they've gone through the U.S. and it's basically have basically drawn a map and presented it to every state and says, here's what we'd like to cover. Okay, so our opportunity is to basically give feedback to them and say, oops, you missed this area, or we need much more focus in certain types of coverage. The other is they've asked for phased deployment, and again we'll provide feedback in that area as well, and that's closely related to the coverage requirements. So a lot of this information is actually being collected through a formal survey process, and Ed and Kim have kind of architected this, and on the FirstNet Colorado site you'll see two versions of the survey form, and there they are, and many people have provided feedback that we're looking for a lot more, and you'll have a downloadable version of this presentation, and this is a link if you want to go to it, or if you just go to the homepage of the FirstNet Colorado, it's right there. So it's readily available. But this is critical information, and participation is very, very, very important. Did I miss anything? Okay. Okay, so the next few slides basically show some of the information that gets collected in this process. So one is, and this is very sort of simple, but it's demographics of each public safety entity. So there are 60,000 public safety entities in the United States, but unfortunately there's no comprehensive database of who they all are and all of the details. And so, but this is very important in terms of planning the capabilities of a network. And part of it is, having both points of contact as well as knowing number of people, vehicles, and so forth, because this will all, impact the requirements of the network. Another section, kind of number of devices, and so there's an interest in exploring. Basically, do you use personal devices? Do you have department-issued devices? How many are there? Are there vehicles that are wired with devices and so forth? So that's another area of input. And then, this is just more sort of detail in those areas. Operational areas, so for instance, as we collect dispatch information, we're also interested in seeing maps of just the coverage area of each organization. And then one of the things that that Kim alluded to, and we'll actually show you a lot more information in just a moment, is basically the computer-aided dispatch information, how that gets used. That's one of several different types of input that give us insight into where there are needs. Now, what's interesting there is I know some areas there is, in a lot of areas, there's no coverage of any form of wireless, and so when incidents occur, people may need to drive a few miles to make a 911 call. So that obviously skews the data. But it's even so, it's something that's as a layer of several types of information, very valuable. What kind of services and applications are you using, and what do you envision using? That's another area of interest. Data usage, is it, how much data per first responder do you use, and how many devices do you use? And this is something that we can we also have a lot of information just from the consumer marketplace of what people use. And so, but what we're trying to do is to the extent that we can understand, is a typical first responder similar to a consumer, or do they use less or more? And obviously the context of that usage may be very different. And then current service providers, plans and pricing. So there's several reasons that this is important. One is one of the objectives of FirstNet is that the service is affordable. And so just like any other procurement decision, people need to do a balancing act between what you spend on the network and the number of users you have, and then basically the cost of the service. And so, but part of the objective is that it needs to be, I think most people, the objective would be that it would fall pretty much in line with current pricing. And so one of the questions is, what are people paying, and how is it bundled and so forth? And this is going to be collected on a nationwide basis. And then finally, as I think Kim mentioned, what are the barriers to adoption? So when you kind of look at even commercial mobile broadband today, what are the things that cause you to say, gee, if it only did this, we'd use it in spades, but it doesn't. So those are very important questions. And then just a little bit on the state decision-making process. So this is the next few slides. These are basically sort of dimensions to the spreadsheet that they're asking for. This is sort of all the demographics and devices and applications and so forth. So that's basically a kind of a fly through of what FirstNet is requesting, and what we're chartered to do between now and the end of September. So one of the things that's been very beneficial in Colorado is we have a number of what I'm calling experimental systems that have actually been very powerful inputs to the process, and will help us think through needs based on some direct experience. So one of them is the Adams County Band 14 trial. And this is a picture where each of the little red dots there represents a site. And this is something that Brian talked about just very briefly. And basically, this is currently operational, and this is something that actually shows the radio propagation that you get from each of the sites. And what's interesting, we have, for instance, one site in the east, which is called Hoyt, which has a antenna at 550 feet. And if you sort of look at the size of the green area, it's got a lot of coverage. And you've got other ones that are a lot smaller. So this is actually indicative of what you see overall in the wireless industry. You have some sites that could have a big footprint, and then others that would have smaller. But this is also in an area that's much less populated, and versus these are denser, and you'd want to have a lot more sites. So this is one kind of very valuable program that's going on. And then
Hey, Randy.
Yes.
Let me just stay here. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the LMR system, the network system, the difference between that and cellular network, whether it's a 4G network or it's a 2G network, is that cellular networks, not a broadcast network like devices, high power, high power. In fact, most of the cellular technology is try to transmit lower power as possible on the system. So, for instance, in the county I live in Boulder, we have 2 sites. We've got 16 one-dimensional cell sites that cover the same power. So you kind of see that here when you see sectorized coverage. So each cell site may have 3 sectors and cover 45 to 65. So that's why understanding where the antennas go down until what they cover are important, because not only is it power placement, antenna placement, it's a different type of technology that covers a lot more sites, that cover a lot more backhaul, a lot more power required. So that's just to kind of help you understand what we're looking at. Different problem, and you had issues maintaining just PRS. Now you have a lot more sites. So how we getting your input on where sites are accessible.
Good. And then another thing that sort of has a lot of similarity that we've done is there was a demonstration network in Vail for the FIS World Ski Championships, and this was actually sort of an example to stress the system and to see what a Band 14 system could do under heavy traffic load. And Kim presented a very comprehensive piece on this at the IWCE conference, and that is also, let's see, there's a link to that there, which again, if you download the presentation, you can click on that, and you'll have kind of a lot of the detail there.
Do you want to, if we
Yes.
don't mind, just Jennifer, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to just talk briefly about the value you found from a user perspective?
Sure. There were over 40 agencies from Fire EMS represented that came to Valley at 2 big projects, and they were given a device. It didn't take very long for them to appreciate with those devices. They actually did one certificate show a map of where a suspicious vehicle was. Responders get to the station right away because they could see on their devices that it had the application draw out a response vehicle. They were able to take it to fail. They were able to get device and response in general as that. Thank you.
Great. So this is just to give you a little bit of background now on just the process with FirstNet. This is basically a timeline here where they've issued what they call their draft RFQ. We had 661 questions that different people submitted that they responded to. There's a there's a time in September where we basically need to provide all of our input, from each of the states, and then the RFP in its final form is expected to be released at the end of this year or beginning of next year. And again, this is something that you will probably have a hard time seeing, but it'll be easier to see if you download the presentation. And basically, this gives a FirstNet's view of the timeline of deployment, and they're basically describing something that happens over a 5-year period. And we've part of our response in public comments to FirstNet is this is way too long, and it needs to be compressed. And our belief is that a competent commercial operator could do it in a small fraction of this time, at least for a large portion of the deployment. And so our belief is that it should be compressed significantly from this level. Okay, so the other thing too is there are a number of permutations that are possible in terms of how the network could get deployed. So the very simple view is that you have one vendor who gets a contract and does the entire country, and that it could end up rolling out in exactly that fashion. Another variation is one where we have something like that, but where you have either states or regions that decide to deploy their own radio access network. And so this is just an option under the act that created the FirstNet legislation. And this is something that in the next 2 years, and as the consultation proceeds, states and even regions will decide if they want to go down this route or not. But it's basically there will eventually be a network which has a nationwide footprint. But there are a number of decision-making points for states along that trajectory. The other thing too is one thing that's important in the commercial sector. People talk about business plans. In government, you often tend to talk about sustainability, but there's an overall financial model that needs to play out for the whole system to work. And basically, the federal government has set aside $7 billion in cash for the construction of the network. Plus, there's a revenue stream from user fees. So this would be similar to what someone pays today for just a broadband access with a commercial provider. Plus, they have what's called synergies. So if an existing operator deploys this as part of their network, there'll be a lot of costs that are avoided because you already have a lot of the cell sites, and there'll be a lot of shared equipment. And then finally, there's an element that's they call excess network capacity. So the idea here is that particularly in denser areas, so in urban and suburban areas, there will be a lot of excess capacity on the network, and the idea is that the bidder will be able to sell this on a wholesale basis to the general public, basically, so that what first responders are not using could be resold, and that has huge economic value, and actually will in all likelihood fund a very large portion of the cost of the system, because to build a national network of the quality we envision costs a lot more than $7 billion. So those are all components to make it work. And one thing is if you're interested, there's some great resources. So FirstNet Colorado has a YouTube video channel, and lots of interesting things appear there. And there also have been 2 different congressional oversight hearings on FirstNet. One with the Senate Commerce Committee, and one with the House Committee. And these are a couple hours in length. So if you're indulge in this only if you have the time and inclination. But here you'll see, senators and representatives from Colorado and from every other state, kind of weigh in on their issues. And you'll actually find that a lot of the things that, particularly things like rural coverage get a lot of play in the discussions here. So these are very interesting things. And also you can just search for FirstNet on YouTube, and you'll see a growing amount of content there from other states and from different places. So one of the things that FirstNet did is they put together a coverage map for every state, and basically in this visualization, they released it as what they call shape files. So it was basically polygons showing coverage, and we took those and superimposed it on top of Google Earth. So that's the visualization, and they basically had what are called low, medium, and high priority areas. And this is something that, and so right now, the intent is to cover all of those, and so there's not a lot of difference in meaning. Now, many of you may look at this and you may say, well, gee, my county is not covered all that well. And so that's that's part of our opportunity really in this next 60 days, is to provide feedback and say, for instance, geographic coverage is spectacularly important. So one of the things that we did analytically, just to help understand this, is we went through and basically said, using GIS tools, what is actually being proposed here. And what we discovered is that FirstNet's design for Colorado has 97.3% population coverage. So as that metric, that's very good. Unfortunately, it also has a very low area coverage, so less than 25%. And I think this is something that in our responses to the RFP, we basically said that rural coverage is very, very important, particularly because commercial operators don't cover a lot of rural areas. But this is part of the opportunity that we have to tell our story in the feedback that we give.
And I'll just say it's important to keep it back, because if states don't respond, you're going to get what right? You're getting 7%. This is your opportunity to speak out, reach out to Kim and let us know, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, and this is also something that sort of quantifies things too. So here we took every county and Indian tribe and basically said, what's the population coverage and the area coverage? And what you'll find is a few of them are very good. So Broomfield County, wonderful, 100% geography, 100% population. Okay, others, may be 13% or 10% of the area. So again, this is I think reflective of a methodology that didn't place nearly the importance on rural coverage that I think most people in this room would. But we've gone through the process of just quantifying this. So finally, I want to say just a little bit about the process of collecting incident data, and what we're looking for, and we've gotten a number of public safety, a number of good responses, and we're in the process of integrating it right now, but we're looking for a lot more. Basically, we're hoping to have basically a year of data, of CAD data in sort of spreadsheet format, where we're looking for the date of the incident, longitude, latitude, or civil address, if that's what your system produces. And it'd be nice to flag it by type of incident as well, although that's not necessary. And basically what we'll do is we'll convert this into a set of maps, and basically this gives us a lot of leverage in sort of bolstering our arguments. If we can say this particular area needs to be covered, and by the way, here's a huge volume of incident data supporting that. So one of the early responders here was Grand Junction, and they provided a very nice data set. And so I'm going to just show you a little bit about what this looks like and some of the conclusions that you can draw. So here is an aerial view. So this is a Google map of Grand Junction. And if you look at it in terms of demographics, this is census tract data. You'll see, different shade, color shading representing population density, with the warmer colors being the greater density. And as you can see here, this would portray, a lot of importance right in the city itself, but not a lot, outside of that. This can further be refined, and we're going to talk about some of these different data sources in more detail later, by what we call clutter weights. So InfoVista has basically characterized all terrain in the U.S. and in the world, where you can look and see how much of it is forest versus light suburban versus urban versus various types of things, and you can project there the likelihood of a lot of human activity. So that's sort of another related view. And so this is interesting. This is the dispatch data set, and this is actually a 1.5% sample. So we can also convert this into a heat map, but it's sort of interesting as a set of dots. And what's interesting here is there's a huge cluster of activity here in Fruta, which if you were just a demographer looking at population, you would never guess. But there's a lot of first responder activity there. So this is a great example of the value of having CAD data as one of the different views that kind of show where coverage is needed. And then what's interesting here is if we look at 100% of the data, it's all over the place. It gets even denser. And actually, what's interesting too is you'll see that there's a lot of response that go, sort of outside of the area. So you have mutual aid, and you have other reasons why people would be responding in other places. So for instance, sort of the conclusions from this is just as an example is that incident data often tells a different story than other things that you might be able to see and measure based on demographics or the presence of roads or other things. So this is part of our sort of encouragement to provide that. So anyway, so this was our first little segment. So are there any? Let me just pause here and are there any questions that people have on this piece? And we've got a series of other of next segments after this. But anything here that we should that needs clarification or raises questions. Okay, so let me jump to this next little piece is actually
Well, Rand is bringing
yes.
up when he brought up the amount of money first that's a big number, so it's kind of hard to conceptualize that. This year alone, AT&T will spend $18 billion. Verizon's going to spend $1 billion. T-Mobile's $4 billion. That's just in FY20. They spent about the same amount. That's $7 billion one time. Scratch that out. Get the coverage that you get. It seems like a lot of money, but that's a person playing.
So this next little segment is just an example of some of the forms that we need, some of the material that we need to provide to FirstNet, and so we're calling it Viewpoint. And so this is just an example, really, of the format of some of the deliverables, and and so it's not a set of conclusions. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. And there's a few questions that are very broad that we need to answer. One is what geographic areas need to be covered, and you'll get a lot more input on this later. But we're very eager to have every public safety entities in every county basically identify those areas that are really important to them. And you know, the means of feedback could be as simple as having a paper map and a giant magic marker, and you draw some contours and annotate it. You know, that would, and take a picture of it. You know, so we're very happy to get in lots of different formats. We'll talk a little bit about phases of deployment, minimum performance specifications, and then also what hardening might be appropriate. So this is a computer-generated map of Colorado, you know, by morphology. And what's interesting is with the most rural areas, we've left it clear, just because otherwise the whole map looks like, you know, it's a giant piece of color and you don't see mountains. We have what we call you know, the rural clutter. So it's sort of it's rural area, but it's, you know, that there's some population density is the light green. And then we've also shown a band of coverage around the roads. And this is just an example of how, you know, how from a you know, from a top-down perspective you might think about coverage. So here we've sort of given automatic coverage to both interstates and state highways. If you drill down a little bit deeper, you'll see that you know, that there are few. The bright red represents dense urban, and the orange is urban. And you'll see tiny little pieces of dense urban in Denver and in Boulder, and in a few places, but not very many. And so, and by dense urban, this is typically you know, high rises. So buildings that are over 4 stories, and maybe they're, you know, 10, 20, 30 stories. And so those are, you know, they exist, but they're relatively few and far between. And then for instance, the yellow is suburban, and then the green is rural. So if you look across the state, you know, sort of the obvious conclusion is most of the state is rural. This is an example of what a coverage of a road looks like. So this is a band, and one of the questions that we'll be asking is how broad should the band be? And so for instance, if someone says, well, what areas should be covered, a response could look something like this. And again, this is not our proposal, but this is just to you know, give you a sense of the format that might be appropriate. We might say, you know, 100% of dense urban, suburban, and 90% of rural cluttered, for instance. We might say in rural open areas, you know, anything that's populated, anything that's within a certain you know, band around an interstate or state road, 80% of the rural open, you know, population, you know, critical infrastructure, power plants, dams, areas where there are historical incident counts. So again, if we have CAD data that says there's a lot of activity here, even though, you know, there's, you know, very little year-round population, then that needs to be covered. And then areas that are important to skiers, hikers, bikers, river rafters, and so forth. So that would be, and part of what we're hoping to do over the next, you know, month and a half is, you know, with everyone's input here, really frame that appropriately and include specific examples for each county and service area. You know, there are some discretionary areas. So for instance, you know, the top of mountains, you know, do you need to cover there? You know, and that's a question mark, and the answer could be yes, but it could be no as well. You know, areas where there's no indication of human activity. Now, in our discussions yesterday, we talked a little bit about, you know, even in some very remote areas, there's a lot of you know, oil and gas drilling, and you know, and there's activity there, and there's fires that you know, emanate from that, and so that's an argument for, you know, even very broad coverage of something like that. You know, and for areas that don't have, you know, high quality coverage, there's a secondary question of just what minimum infrastructure do we need, you know, to make those serviceable. So hopefully, you know, you could have a deployable or an unmanned aerial vehicle or a tethered drone or something like that that would, you know, that you could use in conjunction with your fixed infrastructure to provide coverage. So one of the things that we'll need to provide as input is just phases. So this is, again, an example, you know, of what could be input. One would be, you know, say phase 1, coverage of all interstate and state highways. Phase 2, small towns, recreational areas. Phase 3, public gathering points. So even in a very dense area, you know, for instance, in in downtown Denver. There may be places where you'd have parades or demonstrations or large numbers of people who gather, and you're going to need to have a public safety communication capability there that's not dependent upon the commercial network, because that may get clogged with that density of people. And then generally populated areas, and then maybe finally remote areas that are untouched by human presence. So again, this is just a straw man. This is not the answer, but this is sort of the format that we'll need to provide back to FirstNet. How should we specify quality of coverage? So this, we'll talk a lot more about this in the subsequent sessions, but we can, so one is, if you need coverage within a building, then oftentimes what we do is we provide a spec that says you need a 90% probability at a minimum data rate, and that basically means that voice communications would work well even inside buildings. It turns out that this is a very, very robust level of coverage, and it's an expensive area of coverage. But one way of doing it. Another way would be that we would need a certain probability over the area of the cell for someone who's just standing outside who has a device. Okay, and that's another scenario. A third would say that we're designing around vehicle-mounted coverage, and we want that to be the spec. And what's interesting is, if you look at these three options, the third looks like it's the most robust, but it's actually not. It's the least robust. And so if you specify one, you get something actually much better in your vehicle. So this is where there's an element of sort of science and engineering that comes into this, and we'll show you a little bit more about those trade-offs. Another question too is how much hardening is required, and this is something that we'll want to give feedback. Now, in a land mobile environment, usually there's a lot of hardening. For instance, you'll almost always have redundant backhaul, and there's good reason for that, because if your site goes down, you basically lost all of your comm capability within a town or a city and within a large area. What's interesting is in a cellular environment, things work very differently. One is you've got usually thousands of cells that would provide coverage of Colorado, and they'd all have overlapping coverage areas. So in a scenario where you might have say a hardware failure or some sort of failure in a cell or sector, oftentimes you'll get coverage that bleeds in from surrounding cells. And the other thing is that as you say with backhaul in particular, that's one of the most significant expenses. So you could actually double or triple user fees to get redundant backhaul. So it's something that you may want to use more selectively. So these are just some dimensions, though. Certainly in very important sites, you would want to have redundancy at every level. In your average site, you'd probably want to have a lot of battery backup, and typically in a commercial cellular environment, you may have 4 to 8 hours, and for first responders, you'd probably want to have more. You'd want to think very much about kind of wind and structural integrity. So in natural disasters, you obviously want the FirstNet network to be fully operational, and so that probably means some tougher specs there. Also, things like lightning. The amount of lightning you get in different parts of the country varies, but Colorado, there's a significant amount of lightning, and so hardening against lightning is very important. And so there are things that you could do in designing a network that would give you performance, but would make the system more fragile from a lightning perspective. So one of the likely recommendations would be to have all the electronics on the ground, for instance, so that in the event of a lightning strike, it can be easily serviced, and your time to recovery would be very short. So anyway, this is just another dimension there. So these are what we've just seen here are really just examples of the kind of feedback that we'll want to provide, and they're hopefully within the bounds of reason, but the real question is, for everyone, what would we like to do here? So what we'll do here is I think I'll get started on this, and you know, if we're not done in time, then we'll break for lunch, and you know, because I know it's helpful to give people you know, just some breaks. So this next little piece is an overview of some of the key concepts around the design of any LTE network, and so this is really how do you think about the problem. So we'll say a little bit about kind of first responder needs and radio networks. Second, a little bit about land mobile radio and LTE. What are some of the differences? And then economics, you know, the notion of sustainability, and then, you know, a little bit on coverage, just that there are often, you know, more dimensions than you think. So many of you have probably heard of, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, he was a psychologist a while ago, who basically talks about how there are certain physiological needs. You know, so if you're hungry, or if you're freezing, or if you're drowning, you know, you're gonna want to satisfy that before you think about personal fulfillment, for instance. So there's also what we've put here is sort of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for first responders. So typically when you think about your needs, you know, in an ideal world, you'd have perfect coverage, perfect hardware reliability, infinite speeds, you know, it would cost nothing, and you'd have the most feature-rich devices you can envision, okay? In the real world, you're probably not going to get all of those, you know, and so part of the question that we're trying to ask here is you know, is there a you know, what represents an adequate level where your needs are, you know, are reasonably satisfied? So if you don't have perfect coverage, what do you consider good enough? The other question we're trying to ask is really, what's the right order? So we sort of put these in an order that probably you won't agree with, you know, and so part of what we want to do is just throw this out and just saying, you know, what is most important. So maybe it's coverage and affordability, or maybe it's you know, so this is a real question. And did we? All right. Okay. So we'll do it. Okay. Okay. So we have another little interactive exercise where we want you to vote on you know, on the hierarchy here, but we'll do that during lunch. So this, you know, this you saw a little computer generated piece earlier. So this is again just sort of echoing the concept of what we plan to do is you know, create what we call a policy driven viewpoint, you know, which says, you know, we'll automatically cover this and this and this and this, and then start creating exceptions. So we do this as a baseline, and then, you know, we you know, strongly encourage people to say, oops, you know, we really need more seriousness of coverage in this area, and then we'll modify it accordingly. So when you think about, you know, geographic areas and what should be covered, you know, basically one way to think about it is your urban areas, you know, populated rural areas, and these are usually ones with, you know, some population and roads and electricity, kind of unpopulated rural that has a human presence. So this would be, you know, for instance, areas where we've got a lot of people who are river rafting or camping or doing outdoor activities, but no one lives there. But there's a lot of first responder activity. And then finally, wilderness. These are areas that are rural and they're remote, and there may be no evidence of human activities, and they probably don't have electricity, and they may not have road access. You know, so this is the, you know, kind of you know, gradation of areas that we should think about. When you look at in-building coverage, you know, there are a lot of technologies that come into play there, and it's likely that in more urbanized areas, you know, it'll be a mixture of you know, FirstNet facilities and existing commercial facilities that'll provide that access, and we can talk, you know, a little bit more about those. This is a very helpful framework, I think. You know, there are basically 3 sets of networks that, as first responders, you'll have at your disposal. You know, one would be the dedicated public safety network. One would be existing commercial networks, and then the third would be, you know, deployables. And what's interesting is, depending upon you know, your usage scenario and where you are and so forth, one may be much more appropriate and usable than another. So for instance, a dedicated network is great during special events when when the public may jam the commercial networks. It's also very useful during a natural disaster where, again, a lot of public usage may bring down networks. And finally, in areas that that don't have commercial coverage, it's really the only network out there, and it's critical in that area. But in some other contexts, commercial networks may be the most useful. So one would be just day-to-day usage in populated areas or in localized incidents. And then finally, some areas deployables would be would provide the best service. There are some areas where there's absolutely no population, and then for a short period there's a big one. So Burning Man is a great example. In the desert in Nevada, there is a population of jackrabbits perhaps, but no human beings there except for 1 week when 65,000 people show up. So the other thing that we'd like you to think about is the types of devices. There are handheld devices which are smartphones. It's basically like your current cellular phone or or any device that can operate autonomously. And that you would normally use either outdoors or in buildings. We have vehicle-mounted radios, and sort of a likely scenario that we believe is that just like you have a land mobile radio that's mounted, permanently within a vehicle, that you would have an LTE radio which is permanently installed, and it may create a little Wi-Fi bubble within the vehicle, and within that you could use any laptop, because all laptops have Wi-Fi. You could use your cell phone, and it would have Wi-Fi capability, or you could use PDAs or a broad range of other devices. So this is actually a very interesting and cost-effective way. In a vehicle-mounted antenna, because the outside-mounted antenna has very good radio characteristics, you actually get great performance compared to, say, having a handheld device within the cab of a vehicle. And then the third is what we call a vehicle-mounted high-powered radio. This is a special specification that's been developed, for first responders, and will be part of the suite of hardware that's available. And this would be sort of the one of the best performing devices, and particularly if you've got a very large area and you're on the periphery, this would give you the greatest likelihood of having coverage. Another sort of way to think about it is with land mobile radio, you may either have coverage or have no coverage, right? So you've got either good voice or everything degrades and you're done. Okay, with a data network, it's actually much more nuanced and complicated, and so it's important to understand the dimensions. One is you think about coverage in terms of data rate. How many megabits per second in uplink and downlink do I have? Okay, and that data rate is experienced in a particular venue. So if you let's say we're inside a building, you might have horrible coverage, but you might step outside and have much better coverage. You might then step into the cab of a vehicle, and suddenly the coverage degrades because you got windshield losses. But if you have an installed LTE device in that vehicle, you may have spectacular coverage. So and the coverage would be measured in terms of the data rates and also in terms of the probability. So if, let's say, if you wanted a 10 megabits coverage, if that was your objective, then do you have that with 50% probability, where that's the average, or do you have that with 70% or 90%? And if you want it with 90% probability, then on average you'll probably have twice or 3 times that speed, but you've got very, very high confidence that you can do what you need to do, but it's a more expensive network. So let me spend a few minutes here on just paradigm shifts, because I think most people in the room have a long history and experience with land mobile radio, and and there's a great temptation to sort of think, oh, LTE is just like LMR, but it's a little bit different. And actually, it's quite a bit different. In and so the next few slides we're trying to just portray what some of those differences are. One is, just the magnitude of investment. For instance, the federal government set aside $7 billion, but you couldn't possibly build a network for that price. So actually the cost of a nationwide network is significantly more. It's also very, very complex in terms of just operationally. So you've got a lot of people with very specialized skill sets needed to run it. So basically the way, unlike a land mobile radio system that is kind of run and managed locally, and staffed locally, and even though it has complexity, it's not that complex, and people can do it. With an LTE system, that's just not the case. You need some very specialized skill sets, and so really the way it ends up working is you end up being subscribers to a bigger system, and the cost of devices, there's a big difference. LMR devices are very expensive. LTE, because it's leveraging, commercial standards, should be much, much less. And we'll talk a bit about that. Kind of the richness of features. Basically you think about your smartphone that may have 1 million apps that are possible. The same kind of richness exists with an LTE data device. So you can have machine-to-machine devices, you can have lots of apps. They can be developed locally, they could be statewide, they could be national, so there could be a whole ecosystem. You'll have voice capabilities in each. Currently land mobile radio supports mission critical voice, which is obviously very, very important. That is coming to LTE, although it's several years away. So it's in a future release. But sort of the idea is that you could, and there's sort of one of the questions that's on the table is, should the whole deployment of FirstNet wait until that's available, or do you deploy something earlier? And sort of what we've submitted as comments is, go ahead and get something out there that provides basic coverage and connectivity, and then as the feature releases come along, it's easy to upgrade those in the core network. And so just as a picture, here's a a typical land mobile radio network. So in this case, you've got a single transmitter and a repeater. One of the things to notice here is that edge of coverage performance is very important, because when you get to the edge, your signal may drop off, and then you're out of coverage. Period. So within a cellular network, you tend to have a large number of existing of much smaller cells, and oftentimes as a user, it's very hard to know whether you're at the edge of coverage or in the middle of coverage, or where you are. And oftentimes too, when you get into the border areas, what may cause you to go from one cell to another is simply that you're shadowed by a building. So there are things other than basic geography that'll influence things. The other thing is you'll have, for instance, in a land mobile radio system, in any kind of trunked radio, you'll have a very finite number of users that can be supported. And if you have a channel and someone is talking on it, then that channel is blocked. If you've got a trunk group of a certain size, once it's fully used, that's it. What's interesting is with a data network, the way we think about capacity is much softer. I mean, you could have vast numbers of users, like you have in a cellular system, where you've got basically every man, woman, and child with a cell phone, and it's turned on, and it's in principle connected to the network. And so the way you think about the limits of capacity is in terms of just the total amount of data that flows through it, but there's not really a hard limit in terms of the number of users. And just on price point, many of us are accustomed to thinking about cell phones as smartphones, and they're really little computers that do all sorts of exciting things. But if you basically look at the fundamental, what it takes to have a basic radio for communications, a good example is a GSM phone. So GSM is a standard that was developed in Europe, and basically is widely used, is used across Europe and actually in most countries of the world. Some of the network providers in the U.S. do use GSM, but This could also be a CDMA phone, or could be another type of radio technology. But this is a very interesting example just in terms of a price point. So for $22, you can buy an unlocked phone that transmits at all of the U.S. bands. So 850, 900, 1900. It transmits on European bands, which is and so basically it's usable around the world. And what do you need to pay for this amazing piece of technology? $22. Yeah, so when you buy a smartphone, you've got a lot of other capabilities, which is really a display, it's a computer, it's memory, it's other stuff. But the basic communications is very cheap. So compare this with the price of a land mobile radio. So this is one of the sort of advantages of leveraging a widely used commercial specification. So just a few other examples here is oftentimes the transmit power between a land mobile radio site and LTE is very different. And of course, every LMR site is different, every LTE site is different, but these are just sort of general comparisons. Oftentimes with land mobile radio, you've got a higher site because you're trying to cover a very large area with one site. With cellular, typically, you tend to have more lower sites. Now this isn't always the case. So if you're in a very remote area and you're trying to get coverage, you make it as high as you can. And usually it's when the surrounding community starts objecting and saying that's an unsightly tower. That's when you stop. So it's really driven more by public sentiment. There are often three sectors. The handset power, with a typical LTE device, it's about 200 milliwatts, as opposed to a watt or more. The amount of spectrum that you have is huge, compared to what you would have with a single channel of land mobile radio. And what's interesting too is you will reuse it in every sector of every cell. So your cell may just be a few miles wide, but you'd use all of the frequency, 3 times within that cell. So basically you get a lot of capacity out of that spectrum. So these are just qualitatively some of the differences. And then these are a few things that that you may hear about when you talk about LTE systems. So sometimes people talk about boomer cells. Well, this just really means a big cell. And actually, the concept of boomer cells, it isn't new. It's in the late 90s, there was a boomer cell that was deployed in Australia in the outback from an elevated position, and they had 180 kilometers of coverage, one cell. Now this is an extreme scenario, but what's interesting here is this is not really new technology, but it's largely a function of how high is the cell and things like the curvature of the Earth. And in some cases, if you wanted to get a lot of coverage from one cell, you do things on the over-the-air protocol that would relate to timing. But this is you'll get much more coverage the higher you put a cell. The other thing is what people call small cells, and this is a term that's used for lots of different things. But basically, a lot of small cells are things that end up within a building, and they may cover a 70-foot area or a couple hundred feet. And also in public venues, you'll have small cells. And just to give a little bit more granularity here, you have picocells, residential femtocells, enterprise small cells that are related to a business, and public venue small cells, which in a concert area or a football stadium, you might have something like that. So the other thing is the emphasis of operators has changed over time. So in the early 2000s, we had Verizon's pitchman who said, "Can you hear me now?" And the emphasis was really on voice and on voice quality. Today, you'll see TV ads featuring Charlie and Frank, and they're deploying enterprise small cells and public venue small cells, and really the emphasis on data. So we've seen that shift even in the public, vocabulary and in advertising. Some other interesting technologies, you've got distributed antenna systems that you may hear about, neutral host infrastructure. So this is any kind of solution that is put in with the idea of servicing multiple competing mobile operators. Streetlight small cells is a very new concept, but deploying on what we call street furniture is also something that we're likely to see in the future. Some technologies that are particularly beneficial and appropriate to first responders is things like the high-powered user equipment, and we talked about that. And then unmanned aerial vehicles, otherwise known as drones, which will over time probably become increasingly useful tools, both for surveillance and communication. So you can send a drone up and have a great visibility of a situation, for situational awareness. You can also send it up and use it as a repeater or to enhance, to give you greater communications capability on the ground. And there's also a concept of tethered drones. So these are things that are little flying objects, but they're actually attached by a wire, to something on the ground, and they're provided power and could stay up for, not just 20 minutes or half an hour or 45 minutes, but for 20 hours, for instance. And then finally, voice over Wi-Fi. What's interesting is there are a number of innovations, with the air interfaces for mobile broadband that basically allow you to have voice communications over Wi-Fi. So, for instance, in the latest set of iPhones, T-Mobile currently in iPhone 6 supports this. So you could take one of those iPhones and go into an underground bunker that has Wi-Fi coverage and have pristine voice communications and text and SMS and MMS, and that's basically something that pretty much all the major operators are going to support in the very near future. And it has implications for public safety, because it means that if you go into a building that has Wi-Fi coverage, and if there's an ability to authenticate onto that network through the back end, then that's a very robust network for having in-building communications. Now there are always limitations. So if you're if there's a big fire in the building and you cut the power, then that will work only if there are battery backup, for those types of systems. But still, in other situations, that can be extremely valuable. Something that Emil kind of alluded to earlier is that just the magnitude of funding. That right here, basically FirstNet is getting $7 billion, which is good. It's a great chunk of change. But this is the total investment to date that the cellular industry has had. So almost $400 billion. Now just a few caveats to this. One is this is multiple competing operators. It's for systems that provide a lot of capacity as well as coverage. And it also includes several generations of technology that have been replaced over time. But even in 1 year, that the industry in 2013 spent $33 billion. Okay, so this is all of the money that's been given to FirstNet as cash. They spend this amount in a 3-month period. So it's important when we think about things to look at just the magnitude of cost to provide different capabilities. Now the good news with FirstNet is they've also got dedicated spectrum, and so one of the benefits of reselling excess capacity is that the whole system will generate a lot of cash flow to support the system, just as a result of selling that excess capacity. Yes.
Let's go ahead and pause it.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll take a little break for lunch. We've got some sandwiches over here, and then you get one chance to get some
helpful feedback. So any insights or commentary on your responses to this, because this is actually very central to the kinds of input that we need that we're hoping to gather and want to. Yes.
I'm Mike Mull. I work at the state as a radio tech. I find that funny that the cost is the lowest. Because in the last few talks I've had about anybody doing anything, the cost always is the most. The largest drive. What's the largest drive?
Yeah.
It's that 7 billion
That's right.
Yeah, checks in the parking lot.
But the coverage, that definitely is what we see out there.
Yeah. No. Good. Good. Yeah.
Everybody complaining about the coverage. Not anything else. Can we talk about?
Okay. What is one of the very interesting things I think here is just the ranking of hardware availability. Does anyone who voted strongly for that want to just say a word or two about the requirements or kind of the importance of that component?
Reliability, we don't have much.
Okay, yeah. And so usually, I guess when we think about reliability too, it's usually with a telecom system, it's either 99.9% or 99.99 or 99.999. And so this is also, it's actually a very interesting area, when you think about, say, when you contrast land mobile radio to an LTE network. So for instance, with the land mobile radio, if it goes down, I mean, it is out, right? I mean, that's catastrophic. In an LTE system, say if you had a hardware failure in one particular sector, you would have a diminished capacity and maybe a reduced quality of coverage, until that's repaired. But it may be something that would be much less visible, and maybe invisible to first responders. So one of the very interesting things that we'll need to think about is really it's characterized statistically very differently, the way you describe it. But in a few, like the number of times when you've had a whole system-wide outage of a telecom network in the United States in recent years has been very few. But when that happens, it makes national news, and so that would be spectacularly rare. But perhaps, just like any piece of hardware in any system, you could have a failure in a particular sector, which would be unlikely, but would happen as it would with any kind of system. So good. So we'll toggle back to the key concepts. So we've just got a few more slides there, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll jump into some of the preview of the results, which I know will probably be very interesting to folks. Just one footnote too is over. I started doing analysis of the economics of mobile networks about 25 to 30 years ago, and actually you can make huge decisions once you understand the economics. And in fact, some of the technologies that actually came to market in the U.S. As mainstream consumer technologies were driven very largely by the economics. And so this is a report that I wrote with 4 other authors. It's 1,000 pages on the economics of LTE, and we did this just before the launch of the first systems. When you think about economics, this is just a sort of conceptual view. You've got different market segments, you've got adoption, you've got usage profiles, which is very importantly usage, and that gives you a picture of demand. You've got geographic coverage and categories of devices, and depth of coverage that we've talked about. And so this all drives your network design. And then when you're doing modeling, often you've got a lot of databases of very important parameters. And so, for instance, we have a global database where we can literally look anywhere in the world and do a synthesized build-up of a network and say, here's what it would cost to put in and to operate a network for, with certain characteristics. And then you have a financial model, and then typically you have kind of economics and by morphology, by year. And so morphology is a term that refers to say dense urban versus suburban versus rural. So different categories of terrain. And you've typically got capital, which you spend once and then maybe replenish 5 or 10 years or at a period in the future, and then operating expenses that you incur every year. And then one of the important metrics is unit cost. So how much does a network cost per gigabyte of usage or per minute of use? And almost any network you can reduce to these kinds of metrics. And then finally, you've got a number of just what we call KPIs for the network overall. So population covered, area covered, number of sites, and so forth. And this is something too that you can slice and dice to smaller and smaller areas. So just as you've seen our characterization of the FirstNet design, for instance, for Colorado, when we get to our radio system designs, you'll see, or our radio system modeling, you'll see that we've done a lot of statistical characterization there as well. So just at a very high level, with FirstNet, you've got sources of cash, you've got $7 billion, you've got subscriber fees, and you've got what's called excess network capacity leases, or covered leasing agreements. It's a fancy word for basically saying that what first responders don't get used gets sold to the public, and actually gets, is a great, source of income. And then, the money is spent on network capital, network expenses, and then, I'm calling it sales and marketing, but really someone has to reach out to the 60,000 public safety entities and say, here's what we're offering, and basically do the outreach component, and then billing and customer service. So one interesting thing too is say, how does this compare to a commercial network? So there are a lot of advantages in the model. One is that there's free spectrum, which is of spectacular economic value. There's $7 billion in funding. There could be a low cost of capital in a public-private arrangement. It remains to be seen. That may or may not happen depending upon how the bidding process works. There's an ability to monetize excess capacity, and so this vastly reduces the cost to users, and then an ability to leverage existing assets. On the negative side, though, and this is important to understand, is there are still relatively few users, relatively few first responders compared to the population at large, and so this means that you're building a very capable network, but have fewer users. There's less spectrum than you'd have on a commercial operator. So if you were to build a standalone network and not share infrastructure, it would be very, very expensive on a per site basis. In all likelihood, that's not going to happen because it's by far the system is by far more economic if it's sort of integrated into an existing operator. So there's a high likelihood that that'll happen. Another thing driving costs is robust coverage requirements, but they're critically important for the purpose of the system, and then hardening, and then also just sort of a constraint that overall, if you look nationally, most public safety entities say we're pretty price sensitive, or if it's too expensive, it's a big issue for us. So that's that's a factor for many. So, and here's what I call the vacation home analogy. Okay, so imagine that someone gave you a spectacular vacation at home in a sought-after Mediterranean resort. Your initial impulse might be, "This is amazing. I'm gonna enjoy myself sitting by the pool, and it's gonna this is an incredible gift." Okay, as you think about it, though, you realize that owning a home comes with a number of expenses. You've got real estate taxes, utilities, landscaping, new roofs, and so forth. And so over time you start, and then you also realize that, gee, I might only spend a week there a year, but I've got all of this cost. So actually, as you start to think about it, what was an amazing gift suddenly starts to feel more like a liability. Then suddenly someone reminds you that if you own this asset, what you could do is you could take it and you could rent it out to other people during the periods when you're not going to be there. And this is sort of a mental picture of really exactly what's happening with FirstNet. Is that you got a very, very expensive and spectacular system, and first responders will, are the ones for whom it's designed, but in fact, to pay for it, it makes sense only if you rent out what you're not using. And so basically, this is the concept behind the excess capacity. And what's interesting about this too is once the bidding process goes through its course and a prime contractor is selected, it's almost certain that prime contractor is going to go in and build out urban areas, to a spectacularly good level of coverage. And the reason is it gives them more capacity to monetize. So they're not going to cut any corners there. And so that's a part that we'll get for free. What's sort of less certain is what happens on rural coverage, and that's where, as states with a lot of rural area, we need to really be strong advocates for our interests.
Can I just,
Yeah.
Randy or Evil, could you just elaborate a little bit? Because something that has come up when we did a presentation at the Radio Summit is ensuring that you as an audience understand when they talk about monetizing the spectrum, that is not a detrimental impact to the operational use of public safety on this network. I think sometimes people perceive that if you're monetizing the spectrum and you're making what we're not using available, how does that impact us? Can you just make sure the group here understands that public safety, based on the way the network is designed and operated, will have priority on them?
I mean, that's the intent. We'll talk a little bit about some of the caveats first. One of the differences that LTE technology brings, as opposed to your 2G or 3G technology, is that it enables a concept called quality of service. QoS, the difference here is it's enabled anything. Before, in like Wi-Fi systems, the quality of service only worked on the routing aspect, the wired aspect of it, and congestion. And that's where you really use capacity on the other side. You get more and more users, you're using more capacity. LTE allows you to prioritize that traffic and manage your resources and know what you have every interval. So their intervals are every millisecond, so every half interval. So half a second, you can change the quality of service. Because of this technology, it allows an operator, FirstNet, to give public safety the priority that they need and require for their use, and dynamically assign the best of that. So that's the intent. It has yet to be proven commercially. It's been done in the lab. There are quality services deployed with LTE phone right now, and voice over LTE uses quality of service, voice quality. That's
Yeah, and one thing that's important to bear in mind too is in a rural area, this whole issue is just not a non-issue. I mean, if you gave access to every consumer out there, you'd still probably have bandwidth to spare. So there are a lot of techniques that'll sort of enable this, and even there are techniques even in a commercial world too, where for instance, roaming is an example of resource sharing. But particularly in rural areas, it is designed to as a system for first responders, and oftentimes systems can make decisions of turning users on and off in thousandths of a second. So it's a very, very, very highly responsive architecture.
the one caveat I would say that Brian has brought this up before is that if there's an intent with some of the mountain tribes and some of the westerners not have cell or broadband, there's a thought of using this offering as an extension wireless. In that case, you are going to need some capacity in the site, so that's what but that's possible.
Yeah.
Wireless.
Yeah, and one of the aspirations here too is as you put in a site in a rural community, there are two benefits, several benefits to the site. One, the most immediate one is designed for first responders, but also it can be used on a secondary basis for coverage. So when someone needs to call 911, they actually have coverage, and also one of the incentives for communities to tolerate a tower that is less sightly than a pine tree, is that there are other benefits for the community. So there's a lot of upside to that. So this we've actually seen and we've kind of talked about. This is again just kind of the dimensions of coverage. This is just a couple words on sort of the FirstNet specification for coverage. So basically they've suggested a minimum coverage of 768 kilobits downlink and 256 up, and this is basically a very very moderate specification, and so sort of the takeaway from this is that it's really up to the states to figure out what is best, and so in all likelihood we would choose something that would be more robust than what they're putting out there, but that was something that's part of the baseline. And so basically if you took their baseline and said they're looking for that amount of uplink at a cell edge, this is sort of the specification here, and it's 256 kilobits in the uplink. So basically if you look at it on an area-wide basis, this is what you would get. So in most cases, you would not get in-building coverage. So less than 50% of the time, and in this case, you'd get pretty good coverage with and these are all just different data rates here. So this is 5 megabits, 10 megabits, 20 megabits. So here with a vehicle with a built-in antenna, it'd be good. If you're sitting in a vehicle with a PDA, it would be not nearly as good, and so forth. So this is this is a graph that any of the with any coverage specification we can come up with a graph that looks like this. So if we now look at a commercial specification, so this would be an operator that is designing to a very high quality standard. You can see that a lot of the bars are generally pretty high, and here you've got about a 90% probability in building. So this basically says that in an area that a commercial operator wants to cover and covers well, okay, and those are two important caveats, then you can get very good performance, which is much better than the minimum spec that FirstNet has put out there. Now what we often find is there are a lot of areas that don't have good coverage, and part of it is because commercial operators have made an economic decision not to cover it. And so that's then you do get lower performance areas. But so basically these charts, there are gradation of specs that we could provide, and a lot of it is it's a dollars and cents issue versus just what's the likelihood of performance in any particular venue. And then this is the same thing for a rural area, for the two different designs here. So basically, there are several reference points that we have in terms of coverage. So FirstNet has kind of articulated a minimum standard. It's very similar to the NIPSTIC standard that was sort of put forward years ago, but FirstNet has kind of articulated the same number across all morphologies. And so basically the way I would interpret it is, this is something that we need to figure out, and it's one of the things that will be providing us feedback to FirstNet, really for Colorado, what do we think is appropriate. And again, the more robust the spec, the greater investment that's required. So any questions on sort of the conceptual stuff? And this is really a warm up to showing you a bunch of results, but it's an important piece because it gives you some context. Yeah.
Question. This gets implemented, let's say single nation. What will be the difference between sites?
Okay. Yeah. No, really good question. And I think the answer is we don't know at all.
My question is legality, because then you're dealing with competing competitors that's got to come back across the region. When you start selling bands.
Yeah, you know, a likely scenario, a likely scenario is that actually the band 14 will be put into an existing commercial operators network. So for instance, you might have, you know, operator A, B, or C, and they would just put in band 14 across all of their sites. I think that's a very likely scenario. And then in addition, you know, there'd be build out of rural sites that, you know, have no coverage today. And, you know, but so it would, and so actually the operator that ends up, if an operator wins the bid, chances are that they'll use that excess capacity for their own customers. So, but I mean, it's an excellent question, and you know, and you know, unfortunately, we really don't know how it's going to play out, and even, you know, presumably we should have a better footprint with FirstNet, but again, that's what we're lobbying for, and you know, we'll find out eventually.
To your point, though, is that so FirstNet cannot generate profit. Okay? They cannot go into service those cell phones and Walmart, right? So they can use the spectrum for another carrier or another entity that wants that, and then they can go resell that. But FirstNet is just make enough to cover the costs. They can reinvest in that.
And that's one of the key questions that we are going to have. And of course, this is what this today is all about, is exploring, is to say, based on what Randy talked about, it is what they've signaled to us is that that's their preferred method of implementation, is to go with the carrier and begin with that carrier's footprint and then build out. Well, there's a lot of questions about that. When we'll build out? Because obviously, if an existing carrier's footprint satisfied the needs of the state, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. So that's why we want to explore alternative paths to say, okay, you might want to start with a commercial carrier footprint and then tell us in 3 or 4 years you might get out here. Well, that's not going to cut it for us. And so that's why we are doing what we're doing, is we're saying, okay, what's an alternative? Okay, could we build stuff with other private carriers? You know, most of the carriers, they don't own their sites anymore. Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile and Sprint, they own very few of their sites. They've turned all their sites over to Crown Castle, American Tower, SBA. And so we're working with those folks independently of FirstNet to say, all right, what is this going to look like? Because, you know, American Tower is not just going to let AT&T throw a bunch more stuff on their tower and say, oh yeah, we'll do that for free. You know, so there's these costs. And so that's what we're here to do, is to try to start looking at that and saying, okay, here's the path FirstNet looks like they're going down, and hopefully in the next 6 months we'll know for sure. Is there an alternative? Is there some way we can work with the private industry ourselves? You know, because the biggest question is, FirstNet's looking at this from a national perspective. We understand they have national responsibilities and national goals. Well, the crux of this question is, do those national goals meet our state and local goals? And that's where kind of the rub might come into play. And so what they might say, this is the best case nationally. We might say, well, that's great, but we need what's best locally. And so that's what we're trying to do, is figure out where that sweet spot is. Hopefully, it'll just all work out. But we're preparing, and that's what we want. That's why we're starting this process, and that's what we asked Signal to do the work that they did on starting to look at that, is to say, if it doesn't work out, what are our options? How can we do this? Because we know we've got to do this. It's not a matter of if it gets done, it's a matter of how it gets done and when it gets done. So that's what we want to do. So
good, yeah, and so so these are very germane questions. So this next section, and you'll have a copy of this kind of in the material that's available online. And I'm gonna jump through and skip a lot of the word slides, but there's actually useful information there if you read it. But this is just try to get through it. So this is gonna summarize a lot of the work that we've done, and I think it's going to be very interesting. But it's also just as a warning, it's a little bit more technical and it has a lot of depth. So basically, there are, one of the questions is, what are we trying to cover? And FirstNet has one set of objectives. We will articulate another set of objectives. We haven't yet. So for these first studies, we've actually said we're going to try to cover everything, and then we'll see what we get. So that was the objective. So you saw this slide maybe an hour or two ago, and basically these were all the sites that we were starting with as candidates that we could use for coverage. So this, and I'm just going to skip through this. So this is some of the stuff on coverage. So in a moment I'm going to show you several different studies. One that looks just at what can we cover. just from a coverage perspective, irregardless of capacity. The other is one where we look at coverage and capacity and how those two interrelate. Just as a preface to that, I've inserted a section here on what we call kind of estimating traffics and then on traffic maps. And this is sort of a very interesting thing where we say, do we use population, do we use CAD data, do we use social media to, to kind of figure out where people are? And this will give you an example of each of these. And the answer may be we use some of all of the above, or multiple data sets. So one thing is we're assuming here, we have pretty robust assumptions about usage. So basically, we assume that someone uses as much voice as they use in a traditional, cellular device. We sort of looked at it in the year 2020, and we've assumed 1.41 devices per first responder, and what ends up being just over 10 gigs per user per month. Now that's a lot more than the vast majority of people use today. But what we know about data is that it increases exponentially year after year. So whatever applications you may have or envision today, you're going to be doing a lot more later. And so we're planning that in. We're also, the other thing too is, we're assuming that there are, FirstNet has 4 to 11 million first responders is their estimate of the number of people in the country. And if we add up all the first responders in Colorado, it's a lot less. But the bottoms up approach is really people who are in public safety entities who are easily kind of identifiable. There are other people that will use the system, such as utilities and federal organizations and others. So we've done the analysis assuming very, very large numbers. So just to show you the traffic maps, there are basically 4 different types we're going to show you. One is population. One is population with clutter weights, and we talked about this just a few minutes ago. So there are 16 different clutter classes, and they often just show that that within, say, a census block, a lot of activity may be actually centered in one area. Incident data, and then social media. And I'm going to just wing through these, and so there's no really singular conclusion from this other than to show how the results differ based on the source that you use. So let's here's an urban area. This is Denver, and this is just the aerial view. And if we drop census tract data on it, here's what it looks like. So you'll see dense to less dense. If we make it into clutter class, you'll see that. So this basically gives a little bit more precision in terms of where people are likely to be. Another view of it is social media. Now here, if you look at it, you'll see all these little colored blips, and it's a little bit hard to see at this level. But if we zoom in, it becomes kind of more interesting. So this is Denver with the clutter weights view, okay? And you notice that here's where all the red area is. It's kind of in this region. If we now toggle to social media, we see that the shape changes. So they're both, good, sort of useful views of where things are happening. Here you've got probably the more computer-oriented people. So in college towns, you'll get a lot of, social media activity near universities, but it may not be indicative of, at all of first responder stuff. Here's Boulder, so aerial view, population, and clutter weight. And you see here that there's a census tract area that goes out here, but a lot of the population is actually here. So that's kind of tightens it a little bit. Here's the social media, and then here's a zoomed in view where we show population with clutter weights, and then social media. And here you can see it's very different. So this, for some types of applications, social media may be a great metric. It's not clear that it is, for first responders. So now here's a data set for Grand Junction. So this is closer to home here. So there is an aerial view, demographics, clutter weights, and then social media. And as we zoom in, so this is interesting. So there's clutter weights and then social media. So a very, very different sort of distribution. So this is yeah, I'm not sure kind of what. Okay, so that's college. Okay, so that's okay. Good. Okay, so that's to be expected. And then this is also very interesting too. So this is with incident data. So what's interesting here when you zoom into town, and this is a 1.5% sample, and then whoops, let's see. Okay, but the very interesting thing here is when you ask, who needs, first responders, and the answer is everyone does. So it's really very, very, very ubiquitous and consistent kind of in urban areas. And we'll see this in other sort of zoom in views as well. Is that what strikes me is actually just the consistency of need, that it's pretty much everywhere. And then this is and I think we've seen some of these. So this was the sample of the incident data. Okay, here we go. So this is the same thing, but 100% of the data. So which part of the city is important to have capabilities for first responders? Well, the answer is pretty much everywhere. So I thought this was very interesting.
Can I point out
Oh yeah,
something on that
sure,
map
yeah,
just
you
for
bet,
others,
sure.
some CAD data, because
Yeah.
you can see the little empty area in the middle, which
Uh-huh.
is the university or college where it's all social media. But those dots are based on verifiable CAD addresses.
Oh, okay.
Aren't necessarily at campus. But there's a lot of activity I know that occurs on campus. So
Okay.
you have to take into consideration there should really be a lot more dots.
Okay, no, that's really good point. Yeah, okay. So and I guess the other thing too that I know people raised yesterday is, if you have an area where you have no geographic coverage of cellular, then you're not going to get 911 calls from cell phones in that area, right? So you get basically you get those incidents, but they're showing up somewhere else on the map. So, and this is another thing too. So Vail, during ski season. So we basically ran this for a week in January. And, part of the question here is, do people ski and tweet? And the answer is, for the most part, they don't. Although they do within the lodges, and they do certainly in the residential areas. But you can see, what it looks like, kind of lodges and tops of ski areas. You've got a lot of activity. And then, of course, when you get down into the into the village, you get more. But this is also an area where social media is probably not a good indicator, because if someone breaks their leg, then yes, they need communications, and tweeting is not going to be a particularly good indicator of that. So so let's see. So this is similar to what we've shown. So I'm just going to go through that. Okay, so now we're going to get into the results of just the coverage, which is actually kind of pretty exciting stuff. And basically, the legend is important. So we have in-building coverage, which is very robust, which is bright red, and you'll see that on the map. And then we have, in-vehicle. So this is someone using a device in a vehicle, but where the vehicle doesn't have an LTE unit. And so basically, you've got losses through the windshield and body losses and stuff like that. And then pedestrian and roof-mounted antenna, and then high-powered. So these have very broad coverages, as you'll see in a minute. So here is the state of Colorado. So this is what we can do just with a coverage objective. With the sites that have currently been identified in the data collection process. So this is actually kind of interesting. So a lot of we don't have coverage on the mountaintops, but we've got a lot of coverage in between. For instance, on the in the east, you've actually got areas where if you have a high-powered transmitter, you'll get very good coverage. So because there you've got terrain that's just sloping off slowly, and the signal degrades slowly. Here in the west, you've got you end up having a signal and it hits a huge mountains, and suddenly it's gone, because it's not going to penetrate the mountain. So here you've got more of a on or off coverage, where either you've got great coverage or you've got nothing. But anyway, that's kind of a composite picture. And then
this is just state assets. This is not commercial assets.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
another caveat is that we made some wild assumptions.
Yeah.
So, so what we did, the assets that Emo and Range were working with were primarily from the State Broadband Initiative. So that was the other part of our group that through the NTA, we went out and we were supposed to map what's called community anchored institutions. Again, schools, libraries, police stations, fire stations, courthouses, any kind of public building. And so we took that, and we also gave them all the DTRS towers that we currently have. And so we basically said, just assume you could use this building as a tower. Now, some of those, it's going to be quite easy. You know, if you've got a nice government building, you can stick a roof gun on there. We've already got power there. It's really easy. If the building we looked at was a fire substation out in the hills that has no running power, has no power to it, we probably can't use that as a tower. So, and the height, you know, some of the building codes, you know, we probably can't get 200 feet right here in town in Rifle, or some other towns if we need to, but we probably could get 50 feet. So what we did, so we made some really wild assumptions, just as a let's throw this on the board to look at this. So keep that in mind. On the flip side, we did not include a lot of your municipal and county assets. For example, Blake just got me all the assets from Rio Blanco. So we had a few assets from Rio Blanco, but we didn't have all these when we ran them. So as we move forward, we're going to be reaching out to folks, Pitkin County too. We didn't have all the Pitkin sites. So while some of these might fall off because we say, oh, that building really can't be used as a site, as we work with you guys and we can get some of the assets that you maintain that we don't know you have, we can add those in there. So that's kind of our goal for the next few iterations, is to really wean down and get sites that, you know, realistically could be utilized. So.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, you know, most of these sites, because things like community anchor institutions generally are places that are in the valley. You know, they're not on the top of a mountain. But if you did, you know, put a site up in a very elevated area, you can get spectacular coverage. And so, you know, there is an opportunity as we go through the process. We're going to do studies where we try to get 100% geographic coverage. And like when Emil and I were driving down I-70, we said, you know, here's a view. We need a site there. Yeah, you know, and it would light up the whole valley. And so you can definitely do that. You know, and it comes at a cost, because usually it's hard to get to those sites. They need to be often have you know, a combination of diesel and photovoltaics, and you know, and they sort of need to be very, you know, self-sustaining, but it can be done. You know, so that's another possibility. So this set of graphs here basically shows with each type of venue what you could get with this analysis that we did. So this is something where you've got a vehicle mounted unit with a high-powered amplifier, and this is, you know, the best result that you can get, and you can, as you can tell, it's pretty good. I mean, this would be, I think most people would be very, very pleased with something like this. And again, it's very beneficial in sort of in this area here where the terrain is deteriorating in a very slow fashion. This is the next best thing, and so this is with a, you know, just a regular roof-mounted antenna. So you've got a standard off-the-shelf LTE unit, and you pay for the cost of install, and basically you've got that. So it's actually, you know, this is a very appealing and probably a very likely you know, scenario for a lot of users. This next one is outdoor pedestrian. So this is just someone standing there on the ground. So here you don't have any big fancy antenna. You're typically, some of the energy is going, you know, into your body because you're holding the unit, you know, and you can see that's a reduced footprint. And then this is in vehicle, and here you're holding the unit. You don't have any kind of electronics wired into the vehicle, and it's going through the windshield. So you've got further, you know, factors diminishing performance. And then finally, this is in building, and so here you can see it's much more limited, but that's what you would expect. So we'll do another design where we actually optimize for in-building performance and really, you know, high capacity and high quality in urbanized areas, and you'll see that. But generally, this gives you a good contrast, a good picture of how, you know, the venue and the type of the device can be very impactful. So here we used 1,145 sites for coverage, you know, which is a very reasonable number, you know, for Colorado, just for, you know, for a commercial network as well. And what's interesting here is, you know, we did assume, as Brian said, that you have all of these, you know, community sites which could be used, you know, and so we assumed that they would be, but I think in particularly in more rural areas and communities that don't have coverage, you know, there are a lot of benefits to having coverage. And so, yeah, I think, you know, that you know, there's, you know, a lot of motivation for people to want to do that. the other thing that we did too is we benchmarked the heights of the antennas here to the morphology. So, you know, in a suburban area, we assumed what would be an average suburban cell site height, you know, across the United States. And we did the same in rural. So, you know, you could put up 1,000-foot towers. We're not assuming that, you know, so we tried to be very realistic here. So here is, we're going to give a little bit of statistics here. So this is, for the design that you just saw, you know, this is sort of what you're getting. And this shows by morphology, so that's dense urban, urban, suburban, rural, cluttered, rural, open. And then on a composite, it's, you know, basically a weighted average. So this shows, you know, the percentage of the area covered. And so what's interesting here is, you remember the sort of the FirstNet specs, you know, were very good on population, but weak on area. So here, if you did, say, roof mounted or roof with high-powered amplifier, you know, this shows, you know, 60 to 80% of area, which, you know, is pretty good, you know. And so, and the areas that you're not covering are things that would be mountaintops and just very, very inaccessible. So, you know, so this is, you know, a fairly optimistic thing. Now, what's interesting is if you look at, say, indoor areas, and we had a meeting where, you know, we asked, well, what happened to the dense urban coverage? And the answer is there's not a lot of it, you know, in this design. So it's basically 0% of the area. You know, so it's very poor in dense urban areas, but better in suburban and rural. But still, yeah, about half and half. So about half the time you'd have in building coverage, half not in you know, in say some of the best areas. So that's kind of so-so. If you look at population coverage, so this is what's interesting here. You've got in building not very good, but as you get into the more capable devices, very close to 100%. So again, this says that your selection of venue and device is very important. And then we also ran a bunch of analyses, and you're going to see this for our other design as well, where we basically said, here's the county, and then we had the tribes on the next slide, and we looked at indoor, vehicle, outdoor, so each of the different venues. And in this case, this is area coverage, and so this, you know, this gives you a bunch of very specific, you know, numbers. So you can say, well, for my county, here's what the design has delivered, and this is the kind of analytics that we plan to do for, you know, for each of the versions of the studies that we do. So here's, and you can see pretty much across the board as you go to the, you know, to the more capable types of coverage devices, the numbers get much better. So that's kind of area coverage. So that was study number one. So the second study is also interesting, but it takes a different approach. Here we're looking at both capacity plus coverage, and we actually did this as a two-step process where one, we optimized it for coverage, and then we said, first we optimized it for capacity. And what you'll see is a map where you've got wonderful capacity in the most urbanized areas of Colorado, and absolutely nothing elsewhere. You know, so it's you know, it's you know, either great or horrible depending upon where you live. We then added the next layer that adds coverage to that, and then we ran the same kind of statistics on the group. So this is a very helpful slide. So here you'll see initially we were this orange graph basically shows capacity, and so basically what this is an optimization algorithm that takes a look at the, you know, 6,500 to 7,000 sites, and basically says if you used every site and you just, you know, money was no object, what would you get? And then what percentage of that capability do you get with a certain site design? So if we use the modest number of sites we see here, it designs first for about 95% of the ideal capacity, and then it starts building for coverage, and it cranks up and then hits this where you have both, you know, good capacity and good coverage. So capacity only, this is what it looks like. Now, clearly, if you live in this part of Colorado, this is a spectacularly disappointing result. Okay, but again, no one would build this. This is sort of a theoretical, you know, result. If we just looked at the additional sites for coverage, that's what we get. And then if you superimpose the two, that's what you get. So again, this is just describing the methodology. Again, looking at just the populated areas, that's the result. And then and what's interesting here is I'm just going to click through a little bit. Is for instance, if you look at the red area, the indoors, it's actually optimizing here for very good indoor coverage. And so, for instance, in Denver, you can see that all the vast majority of the area, you've got great indoor coverage. And so this is a very high performing system, based on that metric. And so basically, then if you look at just the populated areas, so you look at the area coverage, it's really bad. So yeah, you're not getting much area coverage at all, as we can see in the pictures. But you're getting very good in-building coverage, which is really what it was designed for in the more urbanized areas. Population coverage, you're actually, whoops, I'm sorry, doing fairly well, but again, you basically your very rural areas are pretty much left out in that. So again, we have similar kinds of numbers here, and you'll see that for area coverage, there's some counties that have no coverage whatsoever. So this is again very, very hypothetical, and so we wouldn't build something like this. So the next step is something where we do this capacity and then we add on the coverage, and this is much more realistic. What's interesting is you end up with 2,700 sites. So this would be a gold-plated network, okay? But it could be done, So here's the composite of that, and probably the ideal scenario would be to take a lot of the urban sites in the study we just looked at, and then combine it with our very first coverage sites, and that would probably give you the optimal. So in this analysis, we lost a little bit in terms of coverage, but it's still not too bad. So anyway, this is showing the different types of devices, and you can see how it changes there. So when we get to the numbers, this is interesting. So here we've got with the better devices, reasonable coverage, not as good as we had in the very first study, and very, very good coverage in even the moderately populated rural areas, through the urban. What's interesting with population, you've got spectacular coverage. So again, this is something that it lost a little bit of quality in terms of the rural coverage, but gained a lot in terms of urban areas. So again, neither of these is we're a long way from saying this is what should be done, but these are different studies to show the trade-offs, and if you choose one objective versus another, what you get, and really what's possible with a certain collection of sites. And again, here's area coverage, and you can kind of see it by county, and this is all in the pack. If you download it, you'll sort of see that. So so yeah, this is actually a good summary. So this is the with FirstNet, this was their, and this was just their kind of their suggested coverage area. So if you remember, the FirstNet was not any kind of radio system modeling or design. It was really just most likely analysts saying you need to cover this dot. But if you actually built a radio system in that area, you'd either need to cover a much larger area around each of those dots, or perhaps you just not cover some dots. So this, but anyway, that gives you sort of philosophically one set of objectives. And here this was our best result in terms of coverage, and here we're just showing from an in-building perspective, and then with the best device. So the best device is showing 92%, 99% of population, 82% of area. Again, if everyone had high-powered amplifiers, so that would be very, very good. And then your capacity plus coverage, this doesn't have as good a coverage characteristics in terms of area, but it's got much deeper coverage in urban areas. And again, just really showcasing all of the trade-offs here. And then we did what we called whole reports, where these are the maps you saw, but we're just highlighting what's not covered. So these were the different designs here. So Yeah, so so this is just a little bit on, so if we use state-owned assets, on the one hand, we've got a great coverage footprint, but these aren't yet real sites, and some could be, and others might not be. So anyway, that's pretty much the run through of a lot of these results. So
Do you also want to just
yeah,
clarify? Remember you telling me this was kind of all things being equal. This wasn't really saying, okay, now we have to reassess based on tourist areas or recreational areas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So part of this is this was we did this so that we'd have some data to show everyone, just as an example of how the analysis could be done. But basically, what kind of the next step is, we need feedback from you. Where you can say, here are the areas that are really important to be covered, and and basically there's a giant computerized process when you do a design like this, where you assign different measures of value to both coverage and to coverage of area and coverage to population. And so part of what we'll need to do is put together a very detailed sort of coverage objectives map, and then that'll also feed into the designs. We're basically going to rerun each of these with a much richer set of data. And so we're looking to everyone to provide that kind of data, and that'll be eventually what drives a lot of the thinking for our September submission, and then for other things going forward. And this is what we'll also do, is this is one of a bunch of analyses. We will also do scenarios where we put cell sites on top of the mountains and see what happens, and it'll look really good, and then we'll identify what would be the cost impact of that. And then we'll also do things like we'll look at commercial sites, and in urban areas, they are a very, very efficient way of getting coverage. And actually, it's likely whatever we prescribe, once it goes to a real bidder for the network, it's likely that this stuff will be co-located with their sites in the more urbanized areas. So anyway, this is one of several studies, but it should give a very interesting snapshot of what the trade-offs are.
Yeah, and I think I just want to go a couple of points, and we would like to get your feedback on this and kind of get your thoughts on this. But some of the things that we really want, that we're trying just to get folks to think about, it goes back to what Randy talked about earlier, the differences between LMR and LTE. When we designed LMR in the past, you got a mobile and you got a pack set, and it's very structured, and you need so that the coverage modeling is much easier. Whereas we talked here, you've got 5, 6, 7 different types of devices. Do you want your cell phone to work in the car, or is it okay if the phone only works outside of the car because you've got a device in the car? It's a lot more complex, and we want to start thinking about that. When we talk about sites, to build an LMR site is an undertaking. It's $500,000, minimum to build a new LMR site. Well, in LTE, again, we have to start rethink our way through it. We can stick an antenna on top of a building. We've already got power. We've already got backhaul to that building, and we can integrate that in. So while we might need 4 times as many sites, 4 or 5 times as many sites, cost for those sites is much, much less. And the logistics to create an LTE site is much less. So those are the kind of things we need to think about. And then the other thing is, when we talk about indoor coverage, that starts to get very specific. One of the things we've been pushing FirstNet is to say, you need to help us make it so that local entities can invest in this network based on their needs. So that if you create a baseline coverage, and Chief Tate in the city and county of Denver says, I need really, really good indoor coverage because of his needs, that the city and county of Denver can invest in this. They can do some of these small cells. They can do that. In Rifle here, you might say, okay, critical indoor coverage, we might need it in the school. There might be a couple of multi-story buildings that we've got to have really good indoor coverage, that we want to augment what the base network is. And that's the great thing about this technology. We can do that. We can take a femtocell or a picocell or a small cell, put it inside your school. A lot of schools are starting to do distributed Wi-Fi systems throughout the whole school. We can tap into that network and, again, get good coverage in that school. So we have to think of it more granular. Where we're used to thinking really, really large scale with LMR, we need to start changing how we think this thing through. And so those are the kind of things that we want you guys, and we need your feedback on how we need to do this. when we create these maps. You might not, again, you might not need indoor coverage in the entire county of Garfield County, but we need you guys to tell us, where do you need indoor coverage? And so we can morph that. And so those are the kind of things we really want you guys to think about, and we want your feedback and start to engage you guys on, because this is going to be a lot more complex. And for us to be able to really have a leverage when we really negotiate, that's what it's going to be, is a negotiation with FirstNet. The better data we can have, and the more we can say, no, we went and talked to these folks. Here's exactly where they need coverage, and here's why they need coverage, and here's why our standards are maybe more than what your standards are. That gives us leverage. So that's really what we're here to do today. And so I guess with that, we'd like some feedback on, you know, what you just saw from Randy and Emil, and what that analysis looks like.
And one of the advantages of that
School season, it's time for the age-old digital question: what kind of laptop should I buy? Well, it's got a little more.
Hold on to that thought here, whoever that was.
Is that particularly for the Western Slope, because of given your terrain, our network modeling that was done by carriers previously was not very well suited for the terrain. A lot of topologies. And so in the last 4 or 5 years, France Telecom had actually been developing a model called the UDA model of French Alps, and it was designed to provide coverage. And so that became this personal model. That's what we're using. So FirstNet's not very few companies that is doing a large scale thing very, very well suited. So we can get very accurate results, especially with terrain data that we have. So if you say, hey, I need this covered, we can model that. Right. So again, you know what? We have a music festival. They are 60%. This is what it's doing. So we can model that. Right now, we don't have a lot. Wrong based on our assumptions. This is good.
And it's one of these things that if we didn't get good feedback kind of during this season, then our arguments with FirstNet might be weaker, and we might be end up with something that's less than optimal, and then people 5 years from now say, oh, why was my community not covered? Part of the reason is because we didn't get good feedback and good arguments that certain areas should be covered. So this is where really the interactive process is spectacularly important.
Is the long-term goal they'll keep off the mountaintop segments?
Not necessarily. No. I'd say because in in an area particularly where you've got very low population density, then that's a mountaintop is a great way, or from an elevated position would be a great way to cover a valley. Now what happens with almost any cellular network, and it happens with commercial, is you often start building an initial system, and put stuff at very elevated areas, and then increasingly put more sites down below for capacity. But actually, I think in this part of the state and with the needs of first responders, that's probably not going to happen for a long time, or it might just very selectively. Like you would have a site in here and in Grand Junction, you'd have sites and so forth, but a lot of the areas in between, you could cover from an elevated place. The issue there is really, in the extreme, if you don't have electrical power, then you've got to have a green site. So it needs to have either wind or photovoltaic, and often diesel generators, and you may need to fly in fuel. So it can become very expensive. But you get a lot of coverage out of that. So it's part of the trade-offs. There may be situations where we want some of those.
And that's where I think working with some of the private sector is going to come really into play. For example, I've talked to CenturyLink about, CenturyLink maintains the microwave network that spans the divide. It's old, but the infrastructure is there. And so I've asked them, would you guys be willing to share the locations of some of those really high sites that do the microwave network? And then they said yes. Obviously, those wouldn't be free, but again, we have to do a cost-benefit analysis. Does it make sense to get some of those high mountaintop sites? There's a company down in the southwest part of the state called Skyworks. They specialize in long-range microwave. They've got one of the longest microwave shots in the entire country. It's over 40 miles. They shoot down in the San Miguel Mountains, and they specialize in what Randy said. They have self-sustaining sites that's between solar, wind, and diesel. They've been up for 2 years straight without any kind of downtime. And these are sites that sit 11, 12, 13,000 feet on top of mountains. So the ability for us to do this is there. Again, it gets down to this cost-benefit analysis. And so maybe we start talking about that's where we also want to know phase 1, 2, 3. Okay, if we could get you, close to what Randy just showed you in phase one, or 80% of that, is that workable for phase 1? So you can at least start using it, and then we say phase 2 is when we start hitting up some of these high sites and really getting some of the wilderness areas or these key areas. What are your needs? And that's what we want the feedback on as well.
Yeah, good. So anyway, give that some thought. And so we have one other little segment here, and this is kind of running through public policy. And so one of the things that we did is FirstNet put out what they call a draft of their RFP. So this is what people will eventually bid against, and it's 30 or 40 different documents, and it's just massively complex and it takes a lot of time to plow through. And so what we did is we did that. We came up, we did two things. We came up with some very high level themes, which I'm going to run through, and then we came up with a lot of very either issues of their organization or technology issues or other things, and we'll kind of run through that at a high level as well. And Emil did a very interesting piece that we'll show you a few slides from now, where we actually looked at the timing of the different standards releases, and he'll give you a little bit of background on that. And that sort of led to some of our comments where we basically told FirstNet, put in what exists today because we need coverage and it's critically important, and then let the software evolve over time. So just to run through some of the high level themes, one of them is what we call sort of complexity of the RFP. And so basically it is very, very complex. It's probably more complex than any procurement effort I've ever seen. So basically what it does is it asks what the offerer or the bidder, but they use the term offerer, needs to sort of forecast usage, forecast adoption, set pricing, and basically anticipate the trajectory of both first responders and commercial users over a 17-year period. Now, if you look at just industry analysts, people may be able to forecast for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. No one forecasts for 17 years in advance. So if someone had asked you 17 years ago, oh, what kind of phone will you have, and what will it look like, what will it do? How many of you would envision what you're carrying today? And the answer is almost no one. So it's a very, very tough task. And basically what it does is they're asking them to come up with with kind of a dollar figure bid that is reflective of all of these different uncertainties. And it's a lot like an auction bid where you have a chunk of spectrum and someone says, I'll bid $10 billion for it. So there's a lot of risk, and it's sort of a game that only the big players can play well. So sort of one of our inputs was, this is too complex, and it's going to people are either going to overprice it because they don't understand the risk, or it'll exclude certain players or things like that. Another message was focus on speed. So something that is we think largely lacking in the draft RFP is it doesn't put enough emphasis on getting the network out there quickly. Instead, what it does is it specifies something that's very feature rich, and they're all important features, but it takes 5 years to do substantial deployment of all the areas, and that's a long time. A commercial operator, if they were motivated, could do most areas that they cover today probably within a year, because they all, most operators have 700 megahertz band, and it's just not, it shouldn't be that complicated. So we think that the criteria of evaluation there should be very different. Thirdly, we suggested, and this is sort of a more radical suggestion, but this is the time for people to throw in incremental as well as more larger kind of ideas. Is just that there may be a completely different approach. For instance, it would be nice. One thing that they could do is let multiple mobile operators just deploy pieces of band 14 in their sites and be reimbursed on a cost plus basis. And what's interesting here is you might get multiple mobile operators participating, and then you could have a single centralized entity like either the state or FirstNet sort of do a design for the entire area and select which sites are best. So that would be much more sort of normal type of RFP from the procurement community's perspective, and probably would have much greater participation and I think might give better results. It's a big departure from where FirstNet is, from the way they're currently thinking, but if you wanted to be completely open to different possibilities, it seems to have a lot of merits. The other, which is also pretty fundamental, is it's important that the states have influence. When a disaster breaks out, people rarely pick up the phone and call their senator in Washington. They call someone local. And so the whole concept of being a first responder is a very local business. And so basically, the way the RFP is designed, it needs to have some sort of mechanism where both in the design of the initial network as well as in ongoing rollout decisions, and no network is rolled out overnight. There needs to be a mechanism for states to have very strong local control. And then there's another sort of maybe slightly more technical thing, is in a scenario where a state decides to build their own radio access network, the fees that users within their state pay should go back to the state. And this would seem like a fairly obvious thing, but it's actually not the paradigm that currently exists. So that's just sort of a consistency thing that we felt should be the case. In terms of coverage and performance, basically what we said is there's a need for a much richer and more consistent vocabulary, and basically we promised to provide a prescription for that in what we file at the end of September. We didn't give an answer in our RFP responses. We also said, and this is kind of interesting, that FirstNet should actively manage the chip, what we call the chip ecosystem. So, oftentimes in Silicon Valley, when there's some new technology that comes out, big companies will assign what they call an evangelist to that technology, and their mission is to go to all the industry events and stir up interest and get people sort of understanding the benefits of the technology and being committed to the roadmap. The same thing needs to happen for band 14 chips. So for this whole economic model to work, it is absolutely imperative that a large number of consumer devices end up with band 14 capability built into them. And so, we think of all the things that FirstNet should do, this should be pretty high on their priority, because if it doesn't happen, then all of the assumptions behind FirstNet could unwind. And we think that actually it's a very strong proposition for just for commercial cellular to do this for two reasons. One is because they'll have capacity that they can buy within in urbanized areas, but also if we do a good job building out rural, it means that your hikers and bikers and river rafters, if they have an emergency or just need any kind of communication, they would have access to a working radio system in more rural areas. And finally, and this is also a somewhat radical idea, but could be a very, very good one, is the idea that FirstNet could actually publicly announce a certain basically wholesale roaming rate to operators for rural areas. And so basically within a state, you'd carve out and say, these are the areas that are probably outside of the footprint of the existing operator, and say, if any mobile operator wants to use this on a roaming basis, here's the price point, and it'll be a really attractive price point. And so what that does is that sends a very strong economic message to operators, which says, hey, wow, I can greatly enlarge my coverage footprint by supporting this FirstNet initiative, because it means that someone is going to go build sites in more rural areas. So this is something, again, it's a little bit more, it's not particularly mainstream, but it could be very, very compelling. So, and this sort of, reply scenario is a time when, when these kind of ideas are very fertile. So maybe Emil, why don't you kind of take us through the timeline? This is, I think, one of the very.
This might be a little hard to see. Yeah. This is just a timeline that we provide in the RFP. One of the issues that we had with FirstNet is that they were instantiated in 2012. So it was actually an APCO conference. The secretary got up, was there and helped introduce and that's great. We're now 2015. Still nothing's happened. Not one. So you wonder, well, when are things going to happen? So we talked about this draft RFP. The intention is that the full RFP will come out at the that's the first thing. Whether that happens or not. Within that RFP, they have stated that they want to base their deployment of the system upon certain features in the technology. And that's why that when we did the little exercise during lunch, when you guys said, well, features and functionality, really not that important. And that's actually a really good answer. Because standards body that watches over, they meet thousands of engineers meet every quarter, and they come with the new standards. A lot of the what are called public safety grade features, the proximity services, which is a direct mode, so talk-around mode and LMR radio. Public safety, so that if you're out in Cuba and we get accurate trail and you have coverage, now first responders can communicate directly. Great feature. Mission critical for talking about it. The problem is features can get developed, and they can get developed in the standards, but never implemented. So what Randy was talking about the chipset ecosystem, the reason this is so important is many features are developed, but they're never implemented. In 2008, LTC put in 49,000 requirements. 49,000 requirements put in. Of those, a small fraction of them many of those will never ever do. It is extremely possible that the features that are developed publicly so that's why driving the market adoption is so important. So, for the timeline, if we go based upon the RFP going to be released, first that's saying, okay, 6 months after the award is made the RFP, we are going to have our first performance. And then a year after that, we'll have IOC 2, and 3, and 4, and then 5 years under our rollout. Based upon that, the build of the network would not happen until 2018 started. The end of it will not happen until 2023. Here's an interesting fact. So the reason I mentioned 2012 was the start of FirstNet. Their lease started on that day. They don't own the spectrum. At Band 14, FirstNet has a lease from the FCC for that spectrum. It ends in 2022. Well, according to that schedule, they don't stop building the network until 2023. So what the FCC has allowed are 2 5-year extensions after that time. Those are not guaranteed. They're based upon Congress saying that your milestones, building up a network for another 5 years, 5 years after that. So the concern is that FirstNet is their wagon to a standards body to deploy the network, and it's completely unfixed. You guys don't need 64 qualm. Why do I need that? I just need basic coverage. all these esoteric features, current LTE standards can do almost everything. So our response, first was, it's completely unnecessary to limit yourself to the standards process. Start building sites out with coverage. The radio, now you put the cell sites. Software. Whereas in the past, you actually had to pull a card. So technology has allowed that. So what we're saying is that time cycle is too long. And we have very good precedent in the States. You look at now, you may not like these examples, but AT&T just bought AWS. They're going to start on that next year. So they're full new nationwide. Verizon built out on network manufacturing population. It can be done if you're highly motivated. So, and that's what we were talking to in timeline. You really think the person should aggressively pursue building up as quickly as possible. Back. If you concentrate on good, a lot of people very quickly. So hopefully they'll take the heat of that. Some of the other things too is one of the tenets of the mentioned is a public safety grade system from a chemical system are two things, and we've talked about them today: coverage and quality of service. If the commercial networks offer you coverage everywhere where you need it, and they didn't block you when you need to make a call during the busy hour, that would be pricing. But they do have those problems. So when there's a large event or traffic jam, etc., down the email, that's an impact. So that's where quality of service comes in. And so the whole intent was that this network would have the coverage that we wanted. Showing that First Net's coverage plan was not necessarily what you guys. That's why we did our input into First Net. The other aspect is quality of service. In my mind, and I think in everyone else's mind, that quality of service would be inherent to public safety. Built-in feature for you guys that PSAP's operators saw an issue, or they can escalate accordingly and give priority to the and that will be there in the network. However, FirstNet has seen our plea to monetize that feature. So in order for you to utilize quality of service, they're going to monetize it, charge you. So that becomes the spirit of what. So we put relatively strong comments in there saying, so voice and text that charging quality of service. And then throughout the comments, you're welcome to look at them. They get pretty in depth to the technical side of things. There are some technical requirements that on some features that they're requiring, other things like that. So it's a little over 30 pages that were submitted.
There is an executive summary.
Right, so that's a page.
2.5 pages.
And so that's good. Kind of and suggestions. They do some very good things. It's not all bad. There are some very good suggestions. So I think for here on the western slope, those across state boundaries, those are issues in regards to some how do you collaborate with other states. So for instance, if Colorado opted out and built their own network and opt out their who's responsible then for cell coverage across, who determines if there's a drop call, is it my responsibility to the site there? Who then bears the cost? And there's a lot of issues with revenue that are that opts out of the network. Are you allowed to revenue state to go? So there's an issue with that. They'll likely be challenged. So, needless to say, there was a lot of areas that commented on. The other one was how much responsibility the state has. Functional responsibility. FirstNet had put together this huge organizational chart. And if you were to print it out, it probably about 27 feet wide. 640, I think, different functional. They had a person who manage these activities. And 23 of those 600 were allocated on those 22. Several dozen more that thought that the state should have things like open control. You should be able to determine what an incident is being done. You should be able to do some comments like that one represent. But other than that, I'll just say overall, but all this Colorado is like it. You are much farther ahead, and they are not. And a response that so kudos to you guys. Really more state as collaborative.
So good. So we're actually, in great shape schedule-wise. So one question, maybe Kim and Brian, are there other, things that we should that maybe we missed in kind of the flow of all the presentations that we should highlight for people or
Well, I thought that to you guys. I think we like I said earlier, we'd love to have comments, feedback, questions on this, other things. We threw a lot at you today. Yeah.
Something that's come from my director is the surveys that are out on mobile aid. Who all do you want them, and are you just wanting the public safety people to do this, or just it seems like it went out to everybody, and then everybody's like, oh, I looked at it and I just.
Well, I think it depends on your area. So, in what ideally what we'd like is if we had an ideal world, every agency in the state would do it. From your small volunteer fire department to your, City and County of Denver Police Department. So it really depends. If there's, I know in a lot of areas, the 911 authority pays for, and manages all the data devices for all the folks. So in that scenario, if there's someone at the authority that could do that. So really, it just gets down to who has the best idea of, what your current data usage is, how much you pay for it, what you might, the information on there. It would be the best person. So whether that you can do that for all the agencies in your area, or whether you need someone from each agency, yeah. So really, that depends. But we will say whatever you can get us, we'll take. If you can't give us every piece of information, we'll take whatever you can give us. We know everyone is busy and has 3 or 4 day jobs as well as couple night jobs, with their agencies and so forth. So we really, so we've tried to minimize the time it takes. But so any data we can get from you guys would be acceptable. And one of the things that we haven't really touched on, we've talked a lot about first responders, and we talked a little bit about the broader, definition. It's our anticipation that this network is going to be used by your public works, by your transportation folks, by your public health. So when you're doing that, you can include those folks in there and just put that in there, because for us, Especially, out here in the Western Slope in the wintertime. If you've got a big event, you're pulling everyone in. You're pulling public works, you're pulling transportation, you're pulling search and rescue, you're pulling the private tow trucks in to help. So, all those people should be part of the network. So,
If you have a minute, can you talk just briefly about any intersection?
What an excellent question, Jim. So actually, we yesterday in Grand Junction, when we had our deep dive, Connie and Paul and I we were talking. We've been letting this kind of conversation slowly evolve because we didn't really want to be forcing ourselves on anything. But when you look at it, there's 96 approximately PSAPs in the state. Almost every one of those PSAPs needs to be on this network, this FirstNet network. So if we're trying to get, high-speed connectivity, ideally fiber, to all the PSAPs, so we can, put up a wireless tower at your facility to get better communication. Well, gee, that makes a heck of a lot of sense that we could use that same infrastructure for next generation 911, or for record sharing, or for other things. And so that's a conversation that I want to start having. I've talked with some of my leadership at OIT about starting to have that conversation to say, when we look at it, on my day job, I'm trying to get fiber to all the schools in the state. I'm trying to get fiber to all the hospitals and emergency clinics in the state too. Well, if I can get it to a school in the community, probably the PSAP's about 2 blocks from the school. The police station's probably about a block from there. The healthcare facilities maybe 4 or 5 blocks down the street. So, why are we addressing this issue from all these different disparate? It's really about trying to get network connectivity to communities and then basically being able to blast that connectivity out and use it in multiple different ways. My vision is that if we can create this statewide network, I don't care if it's LMR that gets you that last mile to the network, or if it's LTE, or if it's a fixed point wireless connection, or whatever it happens to be. The problem is just getting connectivity to the communities. And so I want to start having that conversation. I've been talking with a lot of municipal and county IT departments because a lot of this, as it moves to IP, your IT departments are really carrying the load on this. And so they need to be educated. They know the networking side, but a lot of them aren't familiar with public safety demands and 911 demands and so forth because we've kind of been isolated. So that's one of the things I want to start doing. And as I said, I've had some initial conversations with leadership at OIT about kind of sponsoring this. We have to kind of get our ducks in a row first and kind of get coordinated at a state level. But that is one of the things I want to start doing is really bringing everyone together and saying, okay, everyone, it's one network really when we look at it. And that's going to be used for different ways. What's I don't know if you guys know what's they just said the one piece of fiber can handle how many terabytes of data is it? Like
I know H12.
Yeah. So H12 fibers can handle all the broadband in the whole world. So, it's again, it's a different mindset for 911. We're used to having our old camera trunks, that are 50 years old and buried in the ground. A lot of them, are probably so brittle if you touch them they'll break. But our historical mindset has been that it has to be separate. It has to be separate. Well, it doesn't anymore. Do we still want redundant lines into our PSAP in case one gets cut, like one day up in Steamboat recently when Highway 9 was taken down? Yes. So we still want redundancy, but the idea that that strand of fiber, can carry our 911 data, it can carry our kids' school data, it can carry the Netflix we're going to go watch at home, and it can carry the backhaul for all this stuff we're talking about wireless. It can all be done on one fiber. So it's really time we start doing this because this stuff is, it's really expensive to lay fiber in part of the state. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, a little bit. As a user, I've gone through them, and they've already talked about coverage. Don't necessarily have to grasp it. So talking about, what can be before and how to data that piece up, what kind of transfer back, build that stuff, or having that conversation, flesh it out in terms of, well, I know I need coverage, I want, or I know I want coverage up here. So share.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's probably been one of my biggest frustrations with FirstNet is, the Adams County network is live in operation. So the first responders in Adams County are using this technology right now. They've taken out their Verizon cards, and there are vehicles that just have this technology. and they love it. But that's, as Jennifer pointed out, when we did Vail, we realized, this technology is different, and the upfront time and the planning, and when you're thinking about group communications, all right, what are my groups? If I've got a big event, I have a traffic group, I've got a crowd control group, I've got a special events group, I've got a high impact event group, all that stuff you got to think about ahead of time. And as Jennifer pointed out, we learned a lot from that. And I'd like to continue to do that. And we have a great test bed in our backyard, and so we're trying to work with FirstNet to let us expand that. And that comes from great. They want to set up. They're working to set up like a test bed for companies to come in and test their devices. We met with Falcon Unmanned. They're a drone company. Mesa County's been working with them. Does some great things with drones, and we're trying to hook them up with them so they can kind of get this technology rolling. So I agree. We want to try to get more of that working and actually in people's hands so they can see it and use it and figure out how the heck are we going to actually use this stuff. So.
A couple of comments to make. So when you were explaining about what you do at certain points, that's one thing that enforcement can do. So if the state can develop what use cases for broadband, they being FirstNet or even the state will figure out this is how we'll implement technology. The other aspect is there is. So because they do not have to meet the FCC requirements. So it's possible that you have a device that fail at times. There's no requirement for the unit. They'd be stupid to do that. But they're because of cost considerations,
And the good news on that is they did just post a position to focus. So FirstNet's been hiring kind of what they consider subject matter experts. So they hired someone to focus on law enforcement and say, you're kind of our subject matter expert in law enforcement and fire and medical. And they did just post something for 911. So that they are going to be hiring someone to basically say, okay, you are our subject matter expert in 911 and start helping us figure out these steps in relationship to this network and 911 network. So they have recognized it. And they are working towards that. So that is good news.
That is good news, and I think probably Colorado, at a first education. So kudos to me. And I don't want to give any impression that I think we're not. I'm just bringing up the things that we talk about as well, talking about that. Think about how that converges with the question. Have an opportunity. And why FirstNet try and sell this project and get people involved in the conversation by bringing up this, by pointing out this is what I think a lot of places I feel like what so you talk to people.
Yep. No,
we're in a good place here.
And to me, I think schools are perfect example of that too. Like I said, we're out there trying to get better broadband into schools. Well, imagine if we had a connection into the school and the dispatch center had a direct IP connection into that school as well. And what you could do, how you could communicate with schools better. If you had, an incident in the school and you had a direct data link to that teacher or that classroom, how you could dictate those scenarios differently. Again, it's the exact same network, but no one's really thinking about that if we can get these connections into schools and into PSAP, so we've got a wireless connection out there, how could we do that? How could we make the next time we have a unfortunate incident at school, how can we minimize the impact to the kids through this technology? Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If we can wire school in every classroom, and for privacy, people know, okay, it's only the dispatch center that has access to that, and they have a direct data connection. All they have to do literally, as every teacher now, is an iPad or a laptop, get an emergency button on their laptop, your screen gets notified, you see the camera, you could all of a sudden start looking at every single camera in that school and identify where the shooter is or where the bad incident's going on, and you can direct the people to go exactly where they need to go. And that was the Aurora shooting is another example we've had limited access to it because they can't really talk a lot until the case is done. But if you read the report that was made public, the redacted report, that's one of the things I talked about. Is they said everyone did pretty much as good of a job as possible in that situation. The one thing that would have helped is better communication between the paramedics and the cops, not knowing, rather than saying the whole theater's cleared so the paramedics could go in, could there have been a diagram where the police could have said, okay, this area is cleared, so get the paramedics in there and start helping those 5 people that are in that area. So those kind of things that said, better communication. And Aurora is making they're going and making a huge investment in communications because of that situation. And again, that's what we pushed. We said, look, we have local jurisdictions that want to invest their own money. You've heard Randy and Emil talk about how the $7 billion isn't enough. Well, we have local jurisdictions willing to invest their own money into this because they recognize the need for this. Help us, make it so that when Aurora wants to go invest millions of dollars in communication needs, they do it looking for the future, not isolated. So yeah, so all those things we're trying to kind of juggle and work through.
And I think something coming from my PSAP brain is we really have to begin thinking about, okay, what have we always gotten verbally from the public that we could get in other means now? When we get photographs, when we get a map from them, when we get the cameras, when we get a sensor that may come from their home, and that may be long range, but we have to be, that's the information that we want to have into the network, how it's getting in through the next gen system parallel question, how it's analyzed within the PSAP simultaneous question, and then how it's pushed out to the responders. But you have to start thinking about that. That's the information that always came in on the phone verbally, that was then transmitted human to human into computer, and information is lost in the process. Well, we have the opportunity with technology to enhance that process.
Two-part question. Is there any thought into standards of setting security on the network and also end-to-end device encryption?
So, great question. So, security protocols are already in place for LTE. As far as encryption, so that's a concept that's used a lot in 25, right? For voice communication, so this is where it comes. If you want to do push to talk device here, we basically have to take this phone back. So we have to put an IP encoder in it, run the software. That can be done, but now you're really trying to shoehorn something that's that. And the encryption of this is what's it like a cell phone system. So that hasn't been figured out yet. So, but as far as security goes, you have a SIM card in there. So if you've ever been, so you have a new credit card, it's a chip. Well, the financial industry, so they've actually adopted. So as far as that goes, they did not put out a security section, so they chose not to use that because it's evolving. Trying to get probably knows because you're essentially putting access points across the nation and so protecting that firewall. Advantages because it is an all IP system, you can firewall it like this.
Yeah, and just to follow on, I had the privilege of being on the kind of the board initially when this was passed that kind of set the minimum technical standards. So there's a document that was created by first responders and industry and other folks that kind of said, okay, for interoperability, here's the minimum standards that you have to meet based on these 3GPP standards. And when we're talking security, I somehow got the security subcommittee. I still don't know how I got that. But we were talking through that effort. Emil was actually supporting that effort when he was a PSCR. And at one point we talked about that. We said, all right, we're going to do end-to-end encryption, 256, everything. And Emil raised his hand and he said, okay, guys, that's great, but do you understand the cost of that? And do you understand the performance hit you're going to take on that? That, you're talking about wanting more and more capacity, and yet with all this security, the performance of your network is just going to go through the floor, And so you got to think about that. And like Emil said, I think everyone basically said, okay, it's really important, but we got to figure this out. And again, as we get to me, this is one of those things you figure out once you get the network up and you start to look at, okay, where are my weaknesses? Where are my, where do I need physical security? Where do I need VPN? Where do I need different, different users? Obviously the feds are going to have, and those are some of the things we said was we've got to build this network so that we can layer it. So that if I've just got two guys talking about, day-to-day stuff, that doesn't need to be secured. If you're interacting with a federal agent on a special case, that's got to be pretty dang secure. And so that's what we're going to figure out is how do we do that and how we layer it and maintain the interoperability. So.
And usability. That's the team that security. They would like the box. Okay, it's secure, but it's completely useless. And usability, now you have a fingerprint that crypto key and all this other stuff. Like, wow, something there on the sidewalk, I need to take care of it. My password. Yeah, so there are limits in usability and how that all works. Right? That's really what you guys make the decision. I think FirstNet will provide all the rules for that, and each agency.
I just want to make a comment about the time. Our FirstNet Colorado team done such a good job of educating across our state and getting people kind of enthused about the technology coming, but at the same time, National FirstNet's taking so long to get going. We have skeptics out there that are thinking it's never going to happen, and it's way too far. I'm going to retire by the time this happens. That's going to be our challenge: is keeping everybody educated and enthused. When mostly Colorado is probably not going to be covered phase 2 or phase 3. So now we're adding some road, and I think that's going to be our challenge next.
And we are working on ways to get around that. Just so everyone knows, that the governor's office has been very supportive of this. So even though we headed out of OIT, between the governing body I talked about, Department of Public Safety is very involved. I've got a liaison at the governor's office on the policy side that I work with her, consistently, and she's very familiar with public safety issues. We've been in touch with both Senator Gardner and Senator Bennett, and they've both been very supportive of us and several times have said, what do you need from us? How can we support you? They're familiar with our frustrations and issues. Representative Perlmutter is very familiar with it because he represents the Adams County area is his jurisdiction. So AdCom has been very engaged with Representative Perlmutter. So we have our political leadership engaged and ready to go. We just have to make sure that if we, if at some point we go to them with an ask and say, we want to push this farther, or quicker than they're willing to do, we have to be very specific and we have to be ready to go. We can't go and say, we want both our senators to go bang on FirstNet's door and say, you got to make some changes until we have those changes ready to go. Because the worst thing we can do is say, go change what you're doing and, it's going to take us some time to get ready. So, when that time comes that we're ready to say, okay, we can do this in 2 years, not 6 years, we have it engaging our political leadership, at the federal level as well to be able to support us and say, okay, we got to do this. So, other questions?
Yes, has there been any talk of future? Yeah. As far as comes down to missing the contract, what should your response be? But I don't ever be something.
Maybe you could give us some guidance on that. Yeah, because that would be a great thing to actually put into our response.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and to your question, to Emil's point, that was one of the 600 and something functional areas that they talked about. And I think in terms of who's responsible for that, that's really going to depend on what model they go. If they go with the carrier model, probably going to be the carrier. That's one of the things we've argued is if you would if you would integrate public assets into this, everyone in this state has local techs that they know how to maintain a tower. They know how to, troubleshoot. They know how to do all these things. Are they LTE experts? Not yet, but they can be. And we can use so we can use the resources you have. So those are some of the things we're doing on the SLA. There was a lot of questions. They actually didn't. That was another piece of the RFP that was not there, was the SLA, because they said that basically the bidder needs to figure out the SLA with FirstNet. And there were several comments that said, no, we need to be part of that SLA too.
I know just a very basic, like single image, the whole site, it's usually not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But when you co-locate 2 or 3 things, hours provided by this person.
Yeah.
I know interoperability or working with other agencies. But the more complex each of the sites gets with how many, the more complex the repair of that facility is. Would be the guy to show up first. That's not our generator. So,
yeah.
As long as you have to be looked at.
That's an excellent point. And again, as we go down through, and as Randy and Emil, I say, as we zero in on kind of a potential design, that integrates both private assets and public assets, that's what we would start to then do is say, okay, in our plan, we're going to have, 1,000 public sites and 1,000 private sites, out there. And obviously the private sites, that's one of the benefits is they maintain that site and you don't have to worry about it. But on the public sites, then, and that's part of the other thing we're doing right now is I'm engaging both the Attorney General's office, and then we're going to engage kind of a subset of county attorneys and municipal attorneys to say, what does that look like? What would a large scale MOU look like so that, a small town in the city and county of Denver and a rural county and a suburban, county could all put their assets in a pot, and what do those requirements look like? How does that legally look up? So, we're going to kind of look at that from a legal perspective to see if we can kind of start making a template, knowing that every area is going to have its nuances, and if we do something and one county has a few specifics that they want to incorporate, we're going to have to do that. But if we could get we can get 80% of the way down the road with kind of a standard operational template and maintenance template and legal template, then that would help us go a long way to do that. So those are the things that we'll start doing. And once we can kind of get the lawyers to figure out how that would even look, then we'll start coming down to the practitioners to say, okay, what is it? What for you to efficiently maintain a site? What is the ideal situation for you to maintain a site? Those kind of things. So, other questions? Well, thank you guys so much for spending your time. This was kind of a lot of information, a lot of time. We really appreciate everyone making the drive and taking time out of your day. Your agencies for supporting you. Come down here. This is just the beginning. As Randy said, we're gonna keep coming back and getting your input and trying to make this thing as best as you can. If you have questions, please let us know. Kim and Ed and I will come out to you if you want us to brief your jurisdiction, brief your area, your region. That's what we're here for. Get in touch with one of us and really use us to do what you need us for. So good.
Thank you.